Good evening, everyone out there. I'm sorry we are 1 minute late. James was combing his hair. It took him a while to get it perfect the way he wanted it. And that is why we are just a whole minute late. So you can blame him for that, everyone complaining in the chat that we are late. Which is crazy.
I saw them complaining. I saw comments about that. I was like, oh, like they take this start time really seriously.
They take it seriously because I used to make jokes about how like David Wood and Apostate Prophet were like 5-10 minutes late, and I'm always on time. So now everyone's like, no, you're a minute late. Like, listen, all right, all of you, whatever. Like,
I will be your lightning rod of hate, chat, today. It was my fault.
You get a lot of that on TikTok, so I think you're used to it. You got thick skin now.
Yes.
So everyone, this is James. He runs the channel and TikTok account In Philosopher's Garb. You want to tell us a little bit about what you do?
Yes, I'm just another dishonest apologist who is just manipulating scholarly data to try to gin up apologetic excuses, and when confronted with guys like Dan McClellan. No, so I have a TikTok where I've mainly done response videos, but now I'm dabbling more in doing just some talking about theology stuff. I have a YouTube where there's a lot of overlap with what I do on my TikTok, and then on my YouTube I do a little bit longer form content sometimes. So I've put up some stuff recently related to some stuff we're going to talk about today, stuff from my book. And then, so since people nowadays, oh yeah, there I am. There's my type of stuff. So I also have a background in philosophy and theology. So I have a bachelor's in philosophy, a master's in theological studies, and I'm working on a doctorate in theology at Kairos University, which
nice.
Yeah, I should be finished with that. Fingers crossed. If everything goes well, I should be finished with that by February. So
awesome. We need more scholars and doing this kind of online stuff. So that'd be great if we get that. So yeah, I'm even on your. Oh yeah, you did a response to him. I appreciate you doing that response to Dan, like on the whole census thing.
Yeah.
That happened. He uploaded that when I was like dueling with Bart Ehrman, and I was like, I got to focus on Bart Ehrman. Like, this was back in March, and I'm like, no, I got to do Ehrman. This is amazing stuff. So, and then I just forgot about it, but then I saw you took care of it, so I appreciate that.
Yeah, so. Somebody on one of my videos, or they slid in my DM. I think somebody requested that from me, and that's why I did that. Yeah.
Awesome. So I do wanted to talk to you because you wrote a book that we're going to promote here called "The Devil's Disbarment."
Oh, look at that! You have it right there.
I got it right here. Yeah, I'm on top of this stuff. So I've linked your channel in the book below. Tell us a little bit about this book that you wrote recently. And it's going to relate to the video we're going to respond to a little later. But let's talk about the book before we get to that.
Yeah, so if I have to summarize this book in a nutshell and like why I wrote it, I realized I don't understand atonement. And this book came about from me being like, I need to try to understand atonement. And then what I argue for in this book is my best guess of like an atonement theory that deals with all the data. And so the way I articulated this to somebody the other day is like, if we were to say like a really broad philosopher's garb is the goat. Thank you, Mike. So like if we were to talk about atonement theory at like the broadest possible level, it's like, okay, we were in a pickle and Jesus got us out of it, right?
Right.
That's just the fact of atonement. Well, then let's get a little bit like more narrow. It's like, how did Jesus get us out of this pickle? Well, he defeated Satan and the cosmic baddies. Like, okay, that's more helpful. Like, how did he defeat Satan and the cosmic baddies? A lot of people are going to be like, oh, he died on the cross. Whereas, well, I'm going to differ here. I'm going to be like, oh, that's important. That's an important part of the story. But I'm going to say Jesus defeated the cosmic baddies by winning this type of cosmic lawsuit, or winning this type of cosmic victory in the divine council, in which Jesus comes in kind of like our cosmic lawyer, and he comes in and he slaps down the accusations that have been raised against us. And so part of that book, what I do is I talk about why does this have to happen in order for Satan to be defeated? Like, why didn't Jesus need to come down and do this whole song and dance? Why doesn't God just snap his fingers and destroy Satan? Like, the ideas we're going to talk about later in this video are ideas that were on my mind when I was writing this book, and that I talk about in the book. So that's why we're kind of doing this connection.
So it's like an atonement theory. You use some stuff from like Christ Vicar, ransom theory. And I've always kind of liked ransom theory. I do find it a lot in the early church. Like the idea that, we were beholden to Satan because of Adam's sin and our own sin. And then Christ sort of ransoms, like sort of takes our place. Like the way I've kind of explained atonement is like Christ comes and he says, all right, Satan, you really want me. You don't want these stupid humans. You've really always wanted me. So replace me with them. And Satan, of course, takes a deal. But of course, Satan can't get Christ to serve him, so he kills him. And then God raises him from the dead, and we have been ransomed by Christ. That's kind of how I did it. You kind of take some of that and kind of go another step further. So it's a very interesting idea you're putting forward. I'm still trying to like get through a lot of the atonement little stuff. Is there anything I said that you would disagree with or you would push back on?
Yeah, so I was talking with so this book is like unrelated to my dissertation, but I like started on this idea as like a side project when I was like researching stuff for my dissertation, and thankfully like one of my faculty like mentor guys like was letting me bounce ideas off him. And I think one of the ways I phrased it to him is like it's like a little bit of like Christus Victor mixed in with some ransom and like a little bit of like recapitulation stream, like just a little bit, just a little dash of recapitulation in some sections. Yeah, so like I think there's a strong ransom idea in scripture, which is like, okay, like Satan was in charge of us. But the thing like patristic ransom theories didn't do that bothered me, and like when I was looking at the literature, I was like, this isn't gonna cut it, is one, like ransom theories don't make sense of the data about we're saved because what Jesus can do after the resurrection. Like this idea in Hebrews of like he's our high priest, like we can be saved to the uttermost because he's always present to intercede, or like Romans 8:34, like who can condemn us? No one can. Why? Because Christ died. More than that, he was raised, he's interceding for us. So it's like, okay, like there's all whatever our story of the atonement is, it can't just be what happens at the cross. It has to be the cross plus resurrection and ascension and all that. And so I really focus on that idea of Christ is our intercessor. He's our high priest. Like he sings our praises in the midst of the congregation. And I take that idea and I flesh that out in a divine council model where I say, hey, look, like there's this Old Testament like data and this Old Testament stuff about like there's this kind of heavenly court and people get accused in it and people get defended in it and stuff like that. And then also like because I always second guess my own like theories, and so one of the things that I think about ransom theory is, and this is something that plagued like patristic ransom theories, is who is Jesus being offered towards? Because the thing is Jesus' life, like after his death, like how I would cash this out, and I have a video about this on my channel, and then this is the last thing I'll say, I'll stop talking, is Jesus offers his life to the Father. And some patristic ransom theories, I just don't know how you're gonna like fit that aspect into it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So you take issue with
dishonest apologist. I just saw it. I love it. I just noticed it.
Well, you said I could, so
yeah, that's fine. I love it.
So you take issue with the theory of atonement, penal substitution, and I like some of your criticism. I'm not sure if I'm entirely convinced. One of the issues I think I have is I'm like, why not both? Like, Jesus is high priest, but he's also prophet. He's also God. He's also Messiah. Like, why can't it be, you mentioned like your atonement theory is a mixture of a couple. Why can't it also be penal substitution? So what would you say to that?
Yeah, so it can, depending on how you define penal substitution. So like so this is actually one of the areas I go back and forth the most on. Because part of me is like, so someone like William Lane Craig, who's like he's the big dog out there defending penal substitution these days. He wants to define penal substitution as something like Christ experienced the suffering that would have been the just punishment for our sin if it was inflicted on us, or something like that. It's in that ballpark. My problem is that just seems really broad, because I think you could plausibly say some ransom theories would be penal substitution under this framework. So like if the punishment for our sin or the penalty of our sin is like captivity to Satan and oppression by Satan, and then Jesus comes down and he hangs out with us, and then while he's here Satan like oppresses him, well then like in some sense like Jesus is suffering the penalty for our sin, so that meets that standard that Craig gives. But where I would say I think the core of penal substitution is like the mechanism of penal substitution is God has to punish you either because he's so just or he's got all this wrath, and like God has to deal with this stuff that he's got going on in him, like his justice, his wrath, whatever, in order to like forgive you. Whereas I want to say, hey, listen, it's okay if you want to. So this is, I think, the best way to incorporate something penal substitutionary about my model of the atonement is, and I'll use it as an example, C.S. Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia. So in the Chronicles of Narnia, Edmund and he sins, right? He's a traitor. He goes and he sides with the White Witch, whatever. And then Aslan breaks him out of the White Witch's lair. Yay, victory! Aslan does that. But here's the thing. after Aslan frees Esmond, Aslan and Edmund seem good. Like there's no conception there, if I remember correctly, of Aslan is like, I'm not gonna forgive you yet, or like I've got wrath against you. Like it seems like Aslan and Edmund are good, but it's the White Witch who comes along and she's like, you know that he's owed me. Like, you know, according to the laws that were written by the emperor across the seas, you know that for every, treachery, I'm owed a traitor. And so there's this idea there of the person demanding that this law or this punishment be dished out. It's not God. It's the Satan figure in that story. And then one of the animals near Aslan in this whole scene says, "Oh, well, you want him, come and take him. Why can't we just not do this?" And Aslan just growls at the animal and says, "No, like I can't do that, else all of Narnia will come undone." And so I think something like that, like you can incorporate, like, okay, there's this law, there's this punishment that has to be done on us. And because of this law, Satan is using that to lay claim on us. Like, hey, God, you said for every traitor, like they're part of my domain. He sinned, like he should be part of my domain. Like I think that's the best way to incorporate a penal substitution advocate, way into it.
That's kind of the way I would understand it. Is I think the analogy in Narnia is pretty well put by Lewis. So I tend to just favor that. But
yeah, but here's my big, just like the thing that, like the thorn that sticks in my side about that is I don't know how to flesh that out with the fact that Jesus's life isn't offered to Satan, though it's offered to the Father in heaven. And so because this is one of the main areas I come back to, and it's like the blood that's sprinkled in heaven, like that is, I see that as like the gift, the offering being given to the Father. And so why would Satan be sitting there getting bent out of shape about like Jesus needing to offer his life to the Father, something like that? Like something there doesn't mesh with me. And then also I'm lazy, and so part of me is like, if Scripture doesn't put on me this this requirement of like I need to factor this into my atonement theory, this element, it's just like factoring that element is just going to make things more difficult. So why not just...
Well, as I said, it's an interesting book. I'm still trying to digest a lot of different atonement theories, so I'm not sure where I fall, but I do think this is a strong case, and I do recommend people read this. So I read it over like a weekend, so it's not that long. It's well put together. You do a lot of good job responding to some of the points on William Lane Craig makes and others. So link below, guys. I highly recommend you take a look at this. I think it does a pretty good job of answering some verses related to the atonement in the New Testament that I think we've sort of overlooked. So I do appreciate you putting this book out there.
So what I'm hearing is that this is the official Mike Jones atonement theory. Like that's what I'm hearing now, is that you're saying this is your official position of philosophy, right?
I can neither confirm nor deny the contents of that statement without further authorization from my superiors.
Yeah.
So
take a vote. Right, yeah. Sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's get to some super chats here. Can you respond to Cosmic Skeptic's videos? He's got a huge following and it seems like nobody's answering him. Well, yeah, I do want to do some more. The problem is his videos are really long and they're hard to go through. I could try to put some on put some on there. I think I'm supposed to do a debate with him eventually, but it keeps getting pushed back because they want to do it like in person and it's just hard to get schedules to line up. So we're just trying to figure out when that's hopefully it will happen sometime within the next year. So we'll see. This ultimately boils down to the problem of evil and suffering, I assume. Should be a fun discussion regardless. God bless my game words in Christ. Yeah, it will be talking about some of that, especially when we get into the opening stuff with he just butchers Lord of the Rings lore, which made me rip my hair out.
The way he treats Lord of the Rings is an example of gratuitous evil. Like it's an example of just unneeded suffering on the parts of Lord of the Rings fans.
That's why I ended up in this thumbnail. I was so mad. I was like, I'm in Tolkien groups in like Facebook, and we're always making fun of people who say, why do they just fly the eagles to Mordor? Like there's memes always being posted. So I'm like, with the horrible show Rings of Power coming out this week, I'm like, this would be a perfect video to respond to because he brought up Lord of the Rings. So thank you for the super chat. Does 2 Timothy 3:1-4 debunk postmillennialism? Let me put that up here really quickly. And so we can look at that. But understand this, that in the last days, there will come times of difficulty, for people will be lovers of self, lovers of money, proud, arrogant. No, I don't think this really does, because for the early church, the last days are the days after Jesus rose from the dead to his second coming. Like we're in the last days. And I talk about this in my video a little bit. Was Jesus a failed apocalyptic prophet? I talk about it in the last section of that. So no, I don't think it does, because I think in the last days refers to now. We are in the last days. It's the last section of God's plan. And of course, another IP account. The final form is here, the P version. I don't know who makes these, but man, I don't know how you have this time to make this many accounts. It is impressive. All right,
that's dedication.
It is. There are so many different versions of IP out there. I can't keep up. So, all right, you ready to get into some of this video here?
I'm ready.
All right, and let me pull this up here. So this is Mindshift's video. Let me see here. What do we go? Crap, I hit the wrong thing. I want to go to theater mode, not mini mode. So let me put up his video.
Roast him in the chat. Roast him in the chat. Anytime me and Than have done like gamer live streams, when we do stuff like that, we're like, oh, here's our boomer moment. Like, here's our, like, we're a couple like young millennials. We're like, oh, we're having boomer moments with technology.
I am young and hip with the Gen Z crowd, sir. I will have you know. I figured out what Riz means. Okay, that was monumental for me. Okay.
Nobody knows what Riz means. I don't think
knows.
Gen Z knows what Riz means.
That's probably accurate. All right.
It's like,
so,
oh, good.
Yeah. So this is Mindshift. He's making the case. Why hasn't God destroyed Satan? James thought this would be a great video to respond to because it relates to his book, and we'll talk about some of those ideas throughout we going. So let's dive right in and let's play a little bit here.
I recently watched The Return of the King from the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and spoiler alert, at the end of the movie, after Sam and Frodo have finally destroyed the One Ring in the fiery chasm, they are rescued by the large eagles away from Mount Doom. Now, I'm not the first person to have this thought. It is an ongoing debate about this major plot hole. Why did the Fellowship not simply send the rings with the large eagles to fly straight to Mount Doom and drop it off? Think of all the suffering that could have been saved. Think of all the deaths that needlessly occurred. Think about all of the harm and pain and evil that was allowed to persist during this entire journey. So, what's the answer? Well, if it happened that way, we wouldn't have a story.
And okay. All right. I could go on for an hour.
All right.
James, I am so angry.
Yeah.
As a Tolkien nerd, someone who's read The Lord of the Rings out loud twice to my daughter. This is nonsense. From a storytelling standpoint, from a world building standpoint. You want to go first before I rant?
Yeah, okay. So let's give context to this because someone's like, why is Lord of the Rings? Why are we talking about Lord of the Rings at the beginning of this video? Because he says, okay, hey, listen, just like there's this giant plot hole in Lord of the Rings of why didn't they just fly the rings to Mordor? There's also this giant plot hole in Christianity of why doesn't God just destroy Satan? And just like in Lord of the Rings, the answer is because then there wouldn't be a story. So in Christianity, the reason God doesn't destroy Satan is because then us Christians wouldn't have a story. That's kind of the rhetorical game. And so this first minute is like the only time in this video, I think, that he talks about Lord of the Rings. And so
but it's enough to be bothering.
That's so enough to be bothering. So let's talk about this, okay? This idea that this isn't a plot hole, because if Mindshift had remembered what we were told in the Fellowship of the Ring, one does not simply walk into Mordor. Its black gates are guarded by more than just orcs. There is an evil there that does not sleep, and the great eye is ever watchful. It is a barren wasteland riddled with fire, ash, and dust, and the very air you breathe is a poisonous fume. Not with 10,000 men could you do this. It is folly. And because of that, the idea, a core theme, a core idea behind this entire strategy of destroying the ring is this needs to be secret. This needs to be a covert op where we cross over into Mordor secretly with a small team and destroy it before Sauron even knows what hits them. You know what's not secret? You know what's not a covert op? A bunch of giant eagles flying directly to Mordor. And by the way, these aren't just any giant eagles. These are descendants from the great eagles of the First Age. The great eagles of the First Age who were pivotal in winning the War of Wrath in which Morgoth was defeated. The great eagles, Thorondor, who mars the face of Morgoth, okay? The great eagles who were devised by and servants of Manwë, the chief of the Valar, who is dearest to Iluvatar and knows most closely his thoughts, okay? These are eagles associated with Sauron's just arch nemesis, someone who is diametrically opposed to Sauron and his goals. There's just no no way he's just not going to notice these guys flying towards him. So that's number one. Number two, we know that the eagles are not invincible. We know that they can be damaged by arrows. We know that they are worried about flying over certain areas where there are arrows.
Yeah. Well, hold on. In the Hobbit, they're worried about flying over men in the north on the Great River because they'll shoot them with arrows. Like men, just men. Okay.
And that's just men. That's not orcs with arrows, and that's not even accounting for fell beast riding Nazgul who could come out and fight them about this. And so, yeah, this would have been an all-out battle. And so one, they could have been met in the air by the fell beast riding Nazgul. And if you say, oh, but James, the fell beast, well, an eagle can probably best a fell beast. Yeah, maybe an eagle could best a fell beast in a one-on-one, but those fell beasts have Nazgul riding on them. And those Nazguls, they have magic. They have sorcery available to them, right? They have, they break Frodo's sword without from a distance in the Fellowship, like things like that. And so even if they couldn't, even if the eagles could get into Mordor, guess what? They still have to get down and get through the entrance into Mount Doom, to get to the cracks of Doom, to get in there to throw the rings in. And at that point, Sauron could have just put a bunch of cave trolls in there. He could have had a bunch of orc archers. He could have done a lot of things. And so from that standpoint, that's not going to work. Second point I want to make. Oh, go ahead.
So I do want to add to kind of what you said there. Pete, I think if you just watch the movie, you get the impression Middle Earth is much smaller than it is. But in the books, it's really, really big. When in the Fellowship, when Gandalf is rescued by Gwaihir, you get the impression in the movie he flies him all the way to Rivendell. In the books, that doesn't happen. He can only fly him so far. He takes him to Edoras, which is in Rohan, which is right next door to Isengard. He can't fly him that far. Then Gandalf gets on Shadowfax. He goes up to find the hobbits. When Frodo is stabbed on Weathertop in the movies, you get the impression that he's in Rivendell the next day. It's actually 2 weeks for them still going through the forest before he gets there. When Frodo and Sam get in Mordor, you get the impression they're at Mount Doom the same day. Like Barad-dûr is right next to Mount Doom. It's not. They get caught up with some orcs. They're on the way to Udun, but they escape. And then when they escape the orcs, it's March 19th. They don't get to Mount Doom until March 25th. That's 6 days of them walking through Mordor. The Tower of Barad-dûr and Mount Doom are very far apart in the books. So like if they were to fly the eagles, there's no way they could have just flown from Rivendell to Mount Doom. They would have had to take multiple rests. They would have had to stop at least on the mountain ranges outside of Mordor, where they would have been obviously seen, as you rightly noted. And then they would have been flying over Mordor for hours, where catapults and arrows could have been being shot at them, and they have to deal with Sauron's literal air force of Nazgul. So it's like, there's no way from a practical standpoint you could have just taken eagles to Mordor. Tolkien knew this, and if you study his lore, you'd know that.
And then this isn't even touching on the fact that, as I noted a while ago, the eagles are intelligent creatures. These are not mere beasts. And because of that, they could have potentially been susceptible to the seductive power of the ring. Notice that in the movies, the kind of main creatures who have the most resilience to the seductive power of the ring are the hobbits. Galadriel doesn't even want to touch it. Gandalf doesn't even want to touch it.
In the movies.
In the movies.
The books, Gandalf actually does touch it. So I think it was a nice change by Peter Jackson, but he can't own it. That's the thing. Yeah. He won't own it.
Yeah. And so listen, these maybe Gandalf is like, I just don't want to even give them the option. So one, it may be that the eagles wouldn't have even taken it by themselves. Two, Gandalf may have been like, I'm not even going to roll the dice on that one. And there's other issues you could pull up about, listen, the purpose of the eagles, they have a separate purpose. So the servants of Manwë, they're involved with the things that go on Middle Earth, and they step in from time to time, but they, like Gandalf, their job is to not do everything for the free people. It's not to do everything for the men or
well, that relates to Tolkien's philosophy. The first chapter of the Silmarillion is them singing the song of creation, and Melkor. So
we're going to talk about that.
Yeah, Melkor, who's like Satan of that world. He's Sauron's boss, but he sows discord. And what Eru Ilúvatar says is, you thought you would make the song worse, but in your ignorance, you actually made it better. So this is a big theme. I did a video about a year or so ago called "The Philosophy of Tolkien." If anyone's interested, I go into far more detail on this. But the whole point is that everyone in Middle Earth, all the Maiar, the elves, they know that Eru Ilúvatar is going to achieve victory over the forces of Melkar through divine providence. They don't know how, but they know he will. And this is very much in chapter 2 of the Fellowship of the Ring. This is what Gandalf is explaining this to Frodo in depth. So that's very much a huge theme in there. So like they know that Eru Ilúvatar will win. And this relates to how the ring is even destroyed even. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff going on there.
Absolutely.
Yeah. The only thing I would also add is it's not just like, why didn't, I'm sure Mindshift could respond, well, why didn't Eru Ilúvatar just destroy the ring himself? Like, why didn't he just go in and destroy the ring? And then Mindshift says the response is, well, you wouldn't have a good story. It's not just a story. Like, that's not it. It's about creating better versions of free creatures, creating better versions of yourself. Doing that through dealing with evil and overcoming it with triumph. And I've argued in other videos, triumph is one of the greatest things. Triumph over evil is one of the greatest things for soul building, for creating far better versions of ourselves. So that's a very important point that's overlooked in a lot of ways. And the funny thing is Mindshift sort of like made a point accidentally refuting himself. Because if he didn't want a world with suffering, why did he watch The Lord of the Rings? Why didn't he watch the Teletubbies instead? It's kind of like it. I mean, they live in like a hobbit hole kind of thing, a green hill thing they go into. If people tend to vote with their feet, your actions speak louder than your words. Why are we constantly choosing to watch worlds of suffering? Because I think we intuitively know a world with evil and triumph is far better than a world with no evil to begin with, because you create better versions of yourself. You get more interesting characters. You get people who get to experience triumph, which I would say is one of the greatest things that God has created. Experiencing triumph over evil is one of the greatest things. And that's why God created a world with that, so that we could experience that amazing virtue in and of itself. So that there's far more going on here than just creating a story. It's about creating better versions of yourself. You can't experience courage unless you have to be brave in the face of evil. You can't experience compassion unless someone has suffered. You get to experience all sorts of virtues in a world where there is evil that you could never experience in a Teletubby world. And I think humans, we intuitively agree with this, even though we don't want to admit it. We constantly choose worlds with suffering and triumph because we recognize intuitively these are far better than worlds with no suffering. This is why when we write books and movies, they involve suffering and triumph. We don't make movies about the Teletubbies. That's just, we recognize there's something far better in triumph. So anything else you want to add before we move on?
Okay, so I'm going to add, we can move on in a sec. We can move on from the Eagles thing, but I want to tie some Lord of the Rings stuff into the topic of the video. But yeah, I want to comment there. If I remember correctly, I think it was my first date that I went on with my wife. I asked her, I had this go-to hypothetical when I was dating, and people are about to, like, I since probably think I'm insane. But one of my go-to questions was like, okay, hypothetical situation. Some type of cosmic being comes to you tonight, and they're like, hey, listen, we've been reviewing your file upstairs, and we don't do this often, but actually we're going to give you 2 choices that you can lock in for your future tonight. So option 1 is things are going to go pretty well for you. You're not going to have too much trouble in life. You're going to be pretty hunky-dory, happy life. Things are going to be pretty comfortable, not much pain, not much suffering, super cool. So that's option 1. You can take it if you want. Option 2 is, but here's the thing, one sec. On option 1, you're going to be, happy and all that, but you're not really going to do much for the world, like positive or negative. You're not going to be a Mother Teresa. You're not going to be a Hitler. You're just going to kind of be here. But let's say option 2. Option 2 is, I'm gonna be honest with you, kiddo. This one's gonna be not fun. This is gonna be brutal. You're gonna have a lot of pain, a lot of suffering. It's gonna have a hard time, but you will make a monumental positive impact on the world. We're talking Mother Teresa level, like that, like high, significant. You'll be a saint, as we Christians like to talk. And so, which one of those do you want to do? The world where you're happy but you don't really contribute anything, or the world where it sucks but you do something really good? I think a lot of us are going to be like, yeah, I want to do the world where I'm going to, I don't want the world where I'm going to be happy, but there's no significance to my actions. Like I'll take this world where things suck and still, and things still go well. And so that's when I knew I was like, that was one of my check boxes when I was like talking to my wife. It's like, okay, she gets it. Like, so anyways, so I wanted to add that on to what you said. But now are we done on the eagle thing? I'd have another Lord of the Rings related thing, but I want to tie it into the idea that Mindshift talks about.
No, I just wanted to defend Tolkien's lore. I mean, like the idea that he has a really bad plot hole, it just comes from people who've watched the movies, don't understand the book, It bothers the hell out of us Tolkien nerds. Again, we always are sharing memes in the Tolkien groups about like people just smacking down, like the Batman smacking Robin. Like, why did they take the Eagles to Mordor? Like that kind of stuff. So it always has bothered me. But yeah, I totally agree with what you said there. Like, I think most people would choose the latter one with the suffering because we recognize there's more significance, there's more soul building aspects in there. And like, again, I speak to people all the time who've gone through great suffering and they go, I wouldn't change anything because it made me into who I was and I wouldn't be this person that I am. So like a lot of atheists like Mindshift sort of just assume suffering is necessarily evil. And that's not true. There is suffering that can be instrumentally good, as Justin Mooney points out.
Yeah.
And if evil and suffering can have, or suffering specifically can have instrumental goodness, then it can be used to bring about even greater virtues and greater triumph, which makes for a far better experience. You experience far more virtues. And again, if God is soul building, virtues are primary in terms of what he's trying to build here. So suffering can be a tool for building virtues. I thought some atheists just assume utilitarianism is the normative ethic, like what we see here. It's not that suffering is the bad thing that needs to be wiped out. It's vice that needs to be wiped out.
Yeah. But no, I mean, come on, Mike. Like, we both know that in creating his world, Tolkien made like multiple languages, but we also know he messed up here. Like, he just overlooked this. Yeah. So here's the thing. All right. So shifting gears a little bit. So not only is this a bad rhetorical move on Brandon's part or Mindshift part, because of all the stuff that we've just talked about like this isn't even a good analogy. But here's the thing. Brandon goes to one of the few pieces of literature, or maybe it's many pieces of literature, where Tolkien actually provides a really good framework for how to answer the objections and the questions that Mindshift is going to raise in this video. So I want to take a minute here and dive a little bit more into one of the concepts that Mike brought up a while ago, which is the singing of the Ainur in the Silmarillion, because this has theological payoff, and it's very similar to the ideas that I develop in my book and I defend in my book, and it's relevant to how we're going to answer, at least how I'm going to answer some of the questions later in this video. So in the beginning of the Silmarillion, it opens with a cosmogony of how the Lord of the Rings world came to be, how Arda comes to be, stuff like that. If you read it, you can note markable themes that it shares with the Christian worldview, because Tolkien's Catholic. But it isn't an allegory, but these are ideas that are in his mind, and they influence his writing. So in the beginning of the Silmarillion, it begins with Eru, the one who in Arda is called Iluvatar. Iluvatar in the world of Lord of the Rings is like Yahweh. He's the Most High God. And Iluvatar begins by creating the Ainur, his holy ones, who are the offspring of his thoughts. And after he creates them, he begins to teach them of music, of themes and melodies, and he teaches them to sing. And at first, the Ainur sing one at a time or in small groups. But as their knowledge and understanding grows, they grow and they begin to sing more in harmony. And then Iluvatar, he gathers them together and he puts before them a great theme, a theme that had not yet been heard, and which they were amazed at, and they bowed down before Iluvatar. They're like, this is great. This is so beautiful. And after showing them that new theme, Iluvatar says to them, of the theme that I have declared to you, I will now that ye make in harmony together a great music. And since I have kindled you with the flame imperishable, ye shall show forth your powers in adorning this theme, each one with his own thoughts and devices, if he will. But I will sit and hearken and be glad that through you great beauty has been awakened into song. So the idea is that Iluvatar brings this theme to the Ainur, and he invites them to use the skills which he has taught them to make a great music of the theme. Although the theme comes from Iluvatar, his holy ones are invited to use their powers to adorn this theme with their own thoughts and devices. And Iluvatar is, inviting them to participate and contribute. And so they do this, and it begins really well. It's super beautiful, except there's this Ainur that Mike mentioned called a Melkor, who comes to be known as Morgoth, and he's kind of like the Satan figure of this world. And we're told that while this great music is being sung by the Ainur, and as the theme progresses, it came into the heart of Melkor to interweave matters of his own imagining that were not in accord with the theme of Iluvatar, for he sought therein to increase the power and glory of the part assigned to himself. Sound familiar, anyone? Now, straight away, discord arose about him, and many that sang nigh him grew despondent, and their thought was disturbed, and their music faltered, but some began to attune their music to Melkor's, rather than to the thought which they had had heard at first. Then the discord of Melkor spread even wider, and the melodies which had been heard before, they foundered in a sea of turbulent sound. And Iluvatar sat and he hearkened until it seemed like all was lost. There was just this raging storm of noise before him. But then Iluvatar responds by arising, and with a smile at first. At first, he seems to almost be amused. And he presents a new theme in response to Melkor. But Melkor, he doesn't give up. He rises again, and he presents another rebellious theme. He kind of redoubles his effort. And then Iluvatar arises, but this time he's stern. This time he's not smiling anymore. And he presents a third theme. And this final theme is soft and gentle, yet it's embedded with sorrow. And from that sorrow comes much of its beauty. And we're told that at the same time, there were these kind of two themes, these two songs that were being played before the throne of Iluvatar. There's the gentle, beautiful song of Iluvatar, and there's the vain, loud, repetitive, unharmonious song of Melkor. And Melkor's song was trying to drown out the song of Iluvatar. But as those two songs were playing, the most triumphant notes from Melkor, they were taken and they were interwoven into the song of Iluvatar. And then finally, Iluvatar rises and he silences all the music. And here's what's most important for the topic of this video. This is why I give you all this background, right? So Iluvatar says, "Mighty are the Ainur, and the mightiest among them is Melkor, but that he may know, and all the Ainur, that I am Iluvatar. Those things that ye have sung, I will show them forth, that ye may see that ye have what ye have done. And thou, Melkor, shalt see that no theme may be played that hath not its uttermost source in me, nor can any alter the music in my despite. For he that attempteth this shall prove but mine instrument in the devising of things more wonderful, which he himself hath not imagined." So then Iluvatar takes the honor. I'm wrapping up. Everyone, hold in me here. We're going to get to the theological payoff. So we're close. So then Iluvatar takes the Ainur and he shows them that the song that they've been singing, it's what gives rise to the formation of the world, where before there was only hearing, now there's sight. And Iluvatar says to the Ainur, "Each of you shall find and hear the design that I set before you, and you'll see the things that you thought were your own ideas or your own devices." And he says to Melkor, "That will discover all the secrets of thy mind." And so this idea of what they did is going to show itself in the proceedings of Arda. Okay, so with that said, let's summarize the story by focusing on three aspects and how they might help us reflect on our questions about Satan. So one, we can note that the discord that Melkor brought about originated because Iluvatar gave his creation the power, freedom, and authority to contribute to the world that he was creating. The evil arises as a result of the misuse of that authority. Now, second, Iluvatar allows the discord of Melkor to continue and its effects on creation to manifest. He does that because in doing so, Melkor and all the Ainur learn something. They learn something about themselves, and they learn something about Iluvatar. The discord is allowed for an educational purpose. And then three, even though Melkor meant his action for evil, his vain and evil acts will in the end, despite his best intentions, they're only going to end up contributing to the beauty and glory of Iluvatar. And through all of this, at the end of the age, there will be a new song sung by the Ainur and all the children of Iluvatar, which is even more beautiful than the song that Melkor originally tried to corrupt. And so this creation story by Tolkien, this is really similar to kind of some of the ideas I develop in my book. Just as Melkor's ability to corrupt the song arises from the power and authority that was given to him for good, the effects of Satan in the world arise from the power and authority that was given to him and all the cosmic baddies that was given to them for good. Just as Iluvatar allows Melkor's music and its effects in order to communicate something to the Ainur, God allows the evil acts of Satan in order to communicate things to his heavenly host. And then finally, just as Melkor's discord will ultimately be woven into Iluvatar's theme and contribute to its beauty and glory, so also will God take the actions of Satan and all the pain that he causes, and he will work those things to the good of those who serve him, as we're told in Scripture. So, okay, that's the kind of framework. I want to have that in people's mind as we go forward, and I'll just wrap this up by saying Mindshift really shouldn't have gone to Lord of the Rings to try to make this argument. Like this was not the beachhead that he wanted to choose for this.
Yeah, it was kind of odd because it's like, if you know Tolkien's philosophy, if you've gone through his works, if you've gone through his letters, this actually relates to answering like why God has not destroyed Satan. It's all throughout the Silmarillion. It actually relates to like answers to the problem of evil and suffering. Like it's just kind of a weird thing for him to do. I mean, it's like you said, like God, like Eru Iluvatar allows Melkor to sow discord because it makes the song more beautiful. And when I flesh this out in my video on the problem of suffering, it's through the aspect of triumph. It's through the aspect of soul building. You can't experience courage. You could not have a world where there is courage or compassion if there was no evil and suffering. So evil allows for more virtues to come out, far more virtues than a world without suffering and evil. So you end up getting more virtues, which is God's goal. God is not goal is not to increase pleasure. God's goal is to increase virtue and decrease vice. If we assume a utilitarian outlook, you're going to go, well, God needs to get rid of suffering. If you assume a virtue ethicist or even a deontology outlook, God's goal is to increase virtue and decrease vice. Suffering is allowed because it's a tool that can be used for that. And then you end up creating far better creatures. Just use an analogy from Lord of the Rings. Who is a far more lovable, interesting character worthy of praise? Is it Frodo, who stays in the Shire and just makes tea every day, or Frodo, who went to Mount Doom, almost died, and was able to come back to tell the story? I think we all agree we would rather be the second Frodo, not the spoiled Frodo that's basically just another little bit more complicated Teletubby who doesn't actually have to go out and experience suffering. We would all want to be the actual Frodo who triumphs over evil. And so that's the whole point of it. And so, yeah, it's just kind of ironic. Mindshift is using Lord of the Rings when the whole world building aspect of Lord of the Rings is in a lot of ways Tolkien's answer to the problem of suffering. So, all right, you want to get back into the video some more?
Yeah, let's do it. Okay, I think that's for the most part the lion's share of the Lord of the Rings stuff for me.
Well,
so
let me just
made
really
it this far.
If anyone's interested, I highly recommend you watch this video on the philosophy of Tolkien. Okay. There's a lot of stuff I cover in Lord of the Rings. I compare it to also the bad stuff in Rings of Power. So check that out if you're interested. All right, let's get back into here and let's play the next timestamp.
Surely with God's foreknowledge, he knew everything that would happen, all the pain, suffering, harm, and death that would occur if Satan was not only allowed to live, but to thrive, to be given dominion over our world, to have access to our very thoughts and heart, to be able to deceive us and confuse us, to lie to us, to possess us even. And by his very existence, more people would die and stay dead or burn eternally in hell forever.
So if Satan's allowed, what's your response there, James? He allows Satan and it causes far more suffering.
Yeah, so I wanted to play this clip because I want to make it just a couple of, I don't have a whole lot to say on this. So one thing that's worth noting is when he says, "Oh, God knew that this was going to happen. So why create Satan? Why create Melkor? Something like that in the first place." So he's assuming a specific view of God's divine foreknowledge here. He's assuming some type of divine foreknowledge, Molinism, something like that. So these type of arguments aren't going to get aren't going to get off the ground for open theist like me. And even though I'm an open theist, I'm going to pretend to be a Molinist. I'm going to operate as if I'm a Molinist for the point of this video because I know most of your audience is. Yeah, I know most of your audience is going to be. And I mean, these arguments are so bad, I don't even need to appeal to open theists. I could be a Molinist and it's not going to make a difference. I do the same thing in my book. I'm just like, I'm just going to pretend I'm a Molinist. But here's the thing. I was like, okay, let's say God knew all this. Well, it may be that God also knew that it may be that any world in which God creates free creatures, some devil-like figure emerges. It may be that God's options is to create a world with free creatures that have, authority and responsibility and stuff like that, and that world falls, or not to create at all. It may just be that any world in which God creates in this way is going to turn out this way. Now, and if that's the case, and God knows he can defeat the evil, if God knows he can overcome that initial fall, that initial issue there, then why should God give up on his plans to have this really cool human divine family if he knows he can triumph over that? So even if one says, okay, yeah, God knew all this stuff was going to happen, then when you say that, you're also granting God knows how every conceivable possible set of circumstances, he knows how all of those are going to play out. And then to make this argument, Brandon's going to have to make some counterfactual claims that he's not in an epistemic position to make. There's no way he can justify.
Yeah, and again, I would add once again, what kind of world would you create? Well, every author creates a world with suffering and triumph. Who are the authors creating these worlds without suffering that is not overcome and defeated? we constantly vote with our feet. Our actions speak louder than words. We watch movies and we read books about overcoming suffering. We understand it is a world with triumph is the greatest of all possible worlds for some reason. Why do we think a world without suffering, like a world like of the Care Bears or the Teletubbies or some children's show, is somehow better when we intuitively recognize those are kids' shows? Those are not worlds we would want to experience and write about and live in. We constantly say we want to live in worlds or create worlds where there is suffering that is defeated, because I think we intuitively recognize the concept of triumph is the greatest answer to why evil exists, because to defeat evil is one of the greatest experiences a creature could go through. Not only is it one of the most rewarding experiences, it also creates the best kind of soul building. It creates the best kind of creatures out of that. It creates the creatures with the most virtues. If God wants to maximize virtue, he has to include worlds that have suffering and evil that are defeated ultimately, though. So that's what I would say.
But what if someone's in the midst of it and they say, I wish this hadn't have happened in my time? You know what we should say to them? We should say, and so do all who live to see such times. But that is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given us. Sorry.
Which was not 7 in Moria. That was set in the Shire in chapter 2. Okay?
I lied. I was wrong. I misled the audience about I didn't plan to use that quote there. It's too perfect. Okay. Yeah.
All right. Let's play another section here. Here we go.
By the time Jesus arrives on the scene in the New Testament, we have demonic possession everywhere and all of these demons that are running around in legions and hordes that need to be exorcised. And you would think, oh no, this is still Judaism, except it's not. This is a Greco-Roman influence, and it really gets developed via the New Testament. And we can see.
All right. So James, he says demonic possessions is a Greco-Roman idea. It doesn't belong in the Jewish background. What are your thoughts on this?
Okay, before I give my thoughts on that, the first time I sent you this video and I was like, hey, let's respond to this together. You're like, this is the thing. When you heard that, how did you react? That right there, that's how you react.
Yeah, that's basically it. There you go.
No. Okay, so I have a few notes ready for this. This is not super crucial to the question of why Satan allows these things, but it bothers me enough that we're going to talk about this. Just like the eagle thing, it bothers me enough we're going to talk about it. So first off, the idea of there being demons who afflict humans, or these evil spiritual beings who afflict humans, this is not a Greco-Roman idea. This is a human idea. Yeah. This is something that is widespread across cultures throughout all of humanity. And to try to say
the Americas, I did a video a while back called The Case for Ancient Monotheism, and I read about all these different primitive religious cultures, and it's everywhere. It's in the Americas, it's in Africa, it's in the Siberia parts of Russia, it's in Australia. I mean, it's just everywhere.
Yeah, and so the idea that this is some type of Greco-Roman innovation is silly. And so this is also something that is extremely prominent in the ancient Near East, that area where Judaism comes from. Yeah. And so then let me briefly talk about this conception in Judaism in the Old Testament and in Second Temple Jewish literature. So the Old Testament clearly presents a theme of cosmic conflict between God and evil. And I talk about this in through a lot of my book, but we see this in all the language about God being the one who treads down the waves and shatters the head of Leviathan and destroys the sea monsters. That's all ancient Near Eastern cosmic conflict language. We get the idea in Deuteronomy 32 of God setting spiritual beings over the earth. And then in Psalm 82, we have God rebuking those beings for doing a bad job. In Isaiah 24 and Isaiah 34, we have language about how God is going to punish the host of heaven and how they're going to rot away. Jeremiah 10 says that the gods who did not make the heavens and earth shall perish from the earth. Exodus 12:12 has God saying he will pass judgment on the gods of Egypt. Then we have Genesis 6, which gives a story about how the sons of God mate with human women, and that results in these giants. And in Second Temple Jewish literature, there is, for instance, like a Book of Enoch and Book of Jubilees, which well predate the New Testament. There is a connection between that event in Genesis 6 and these giants and the unclean spirits that afflict humans. The idea being that when these giants were destroyed, their spirits are bound in Sheol, but a fraction of them were allowed to continue to roam the earth. And they're allowed to do that because there is some leader of the cosmic baddies, and he gets different names in the Jewish literature. There's this idea, there's this kind of leader, a guy who's in charge of the evil spirits, and he's like, hey, give me a percentage of them so I can continue to have influence on humans. And then while we're on the topic of the Book of Enoch and intertestament literature, It is filled with these concepts of demons and spirits. So let me read you a brief section from the Dead Sea Scrolls. And this is in document 1QS, and this is dated to around 100 BCE. Okay. So this says, quote, all the children of righteousness are ruled by the Prince of Light and walk in the ways of light. But all the children of falsehood are ruled by the angel of darkness and walk in the way of darkness. The angel of darkness leads all the children of righteousness astray. And until his end, all their sin, iniquities, wickedness, and all their unlawful deeds are caused by his dominion in accordance with the mysteries of God. Every one of their chastisements and every one of the seasons of their distress shall be brought about by the rule of his persecution, for all his allotted spirits seek the overthrow of the sons of light. But the God of Israel and his angel of truth will succor all the sons of light, for it is he who created the spirits of life and darkness. So again, this is a Jewish document 100 or so years before the writings of the New Testament. Book of Tobit, which is dated 3rd or 2nd century BCE, talks about an evil spirit, Asmodeus, who was killing a woman's husband, and he has to be bound and dealt with. This Asmodeus is not to be confused with Asmodeus Poison Teeth from the Redwall books. 90s kids will appreciate that. Then there is the idea in the Old Testament of bad spirits afflicting people. So in 1 Samuel, there are instances where we're told that the spirit of the Lord departs from Saul, and then an evil spirit comes to torment him.
Right. That's exactly what I was going to bring up. We have demonic possession in the Old Testament. I was like, the Saul incident. So glad you hit that. I was going to bring it up.
Yeah, and so there's something more interesting about this, though. So we see this in 1 Samuel 16:23, and in those stories of Saul, we're told that David plays music which frees Saul from the spirit's influence. And that idea of David exercising spirits, that doesn't just disappear in Jewish literature. In this Dead Sea Scrolls and the Great Psalm Scroll, there are comments about how many proverbs or how many songs Solomon created or how many David created. And it mentions that David composed 4 songs to free people from possession. And in that same scroll, we see David saying things like, let not Satan rule over me, nor an unclean spirit. And Psalm 91, that is in your Bibles that you can get out and read, is likely one of these psalms connected with exorcism. The psalm names a bunch of evil spirits and says, hey, if you're under the Most High's protection, you don't have to worry about them. So Craig Evans is a New Testament scholar who has a paper that's available for free. You can find it online called Jesus and Psalm 91 in Light of the Exorcism Scrolls. And I want to read a brief quote from him in that. He says, quote, commentators have long suspected that this psalm was understood, referring to Psalm 91, was understood as offering assurance against demonic affliction. This is seen in rabbinic interpretation and the Targum paraphrase, and in an apparent allusion to the text in the Greek Testament of Levi. Nevertheless, some interpreters have expressed reservations, arguing that the rabbinic and Targumic traditions are too late to be of use in New Testament interpretation, and that the apparent allusion to Psalm 91 in the Testament of Levi is either too vague or may actually be a Christian gloss. However, the discovery at Qumran of Psalm 91 in combination with exorcism psalms has pretty well settled the matter once and for all. Psalm 91 apparently was understood in the time of Jesus as offering divine assurance of protection against demonic powers. And then later in that same paper, he goes on to note that this tradition appears to be based on an ancient interpretation that's attested in 11Q11, so on and so forth. So I just said a lot of stuff there. If you want to know more about those ideas, that paper by Craig Evans is good. Yeah. Mike Heiser had a podcast episode. It's episode 87 of his Naked Bible podcast. It's called something like Exorcism of Demons as part of the Messianic Profile. And then Heiser's book on demons is a pretty decent, like lay-friendly kind of intro to all these concepts in the Old Testament and how they go into Second Temple Judaism and then how they go into the New Testament.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, I thought you covered that pretty well. I was going to bring up the Saul incident, and you basically hit that pretty well. I know that I think Deuteronomy 32 also mentions the existence of demons causing problems as well. But I mean, yeah.
Yeah, Shadim. Yeah.
Yeah. So, all right, let's continue on here.
Let's do it.
The main point I want to make before moving on to part 2 is we have a Satan that because of his mere existence, let alone the power given to him, there are people that have been born, are born, and will be born that, according to the Bible itself, will burn in hell forever because of the existence of this being. That if he wasn't here, they wouldn't be blinded, they wouldn't be confused, they wouldn't be deceived, and they would otherwise be with God for eternity. So,
no. That's never ever that's never ever stated in the Bible. That like where is he even getting that from? I'd like to know. Like it's very clear that like this is the problem I have with fundamentalists. And sometimes when atheists deconvert, they bring their fundamentalism with them. And unfortunately, no, this is the fundamentalists give Satan way too much power than what he has.
Mm-hmm.
Like I have a book here by someone called Jordan Paper. He is a ex-Jew polytheist. And he says, listen, he believes in these gods, demons. He believes in these gods. And he says, quite frankly, the book is The Deities Are Many. He says, you can't have one of these gods come into your life unless you actively invite them in to do stuff. So you have to actively do that. The Bible spends so much time explaining sin is man's fault. Sin is man's fault. Sin is man's fault. And one of the sins of man is they contacted demons, false gods, to help them with their own sin. So it's not this idea that Satan is that powerful where God has given him that much power. He tempts, he doesn't control. But go on, I'm sure you've got a ton of stuff.
No, yeah, so that's a theme that I was definitely going to touch on. But I wanted to point out, so setting aside the fact that he's utilizing like an infernalist eternal conscious torment. There's the book. He's using an infernalist eternal conscious torment model of hell to make this more scandalous. And so I just want to point out, listen, there are other views within.
I'm an annihilationist, so yeah.
I'm really sympathetic to annihilationism. So like, but let's say I just grant this. Like, okay, let's say like I grant it. Just like I'm granting a lot of things tonight. It's like, okay, guess what? There's no one who's damned just because Satan exists. Like, that's not a thing. Like, it's not like God's not a program who's like, oh, if Satan condition is met, damn this many people. Like, if you're damned, it's because you chose to join in Satan's rebellion. Like, Satan isn't making Mindshift get up and post these videos. I'm pretty sure multiple times a week he does this, and he just comes out and slanders the God of Christianity without doing, it seems like he's doing this without any type of academic research. Like, Satan's not making you do that, fam. Like, if you're damned, it's because of the things you've done in joining his rebellion and his slander and things like that. That's the main thing I wanted to touch on here. This idea is going to come up again in the next clip that we're going to play. So I'll reserve some of my other comments. But the point you made is a good one. And that's something that, because like I'll touch on this later, but Mindshift is like, Satan's darn near omnipotent and God's just giving him free reign and he can just do whatever he wants with you. And I'm like, are we reading the same Bible? Like,
yeah. Well, you got to compare it. You know, we made comparisons to Tolkien. You got to compare it to Narnia. Like, Edmund is guilty because he joins the witch. Okay. It's not the witch comes in and like seizes him and forces them to do stuff. She has a claim on him because he decided to join her. Same with Satan. If you go back to Genesis 3, which I would argue is a manifestation of Satan, using Heiser, what you actually have is you have Eve joining Satan. Like, Satan doesn't force her. He tempts. Same with, and that's why most of the Bible is just talking about man's sin. Satan is not mentioned that much because obviously the real problem is human sin. So, something to keep in mind. All right, I got the next section pulled up here. Let's play this.
Let's do it.
But a piece of that puzzle is the fact that we have an enemy making things worse, an enemy taking away free will, an enemy that if he had just been destroyed, every single thing about the existence of humanity would be better. And yet we have a God that has not taken action.
Okay, taken away. Those were the words that came out of his mouth, right? He said that Satan somehow takes away our free will. What?
He does this multiple times, yeah. Because Satan can confuse people, and that you can also confuse people, Mike. So that means your existence also takes away free will because you have the power to confuse people.
I have taken away so much free will. I have the power. I didn't realize I was that powerful. I mean, this is just a really bad understanding of what libertarian free will is, or even compatibilism. Like, you can influence someone, but that's not removing their free will. And I made this analogy before. There's a difference between the ability of free will and the availability of freedom. You could lock me in a cell. You've removed a lot of my freedom, not my ability for free will. Satan, if anything, can only remove freedom, not free will.
Yeah, so there's the problem here of that, or everything we just talked about there is like, no, like this, the fact that there's this being who can influence us in some ways doesn't take away free will any more than the fact that I can present an argument which might influence people. That doesn't take away free will either. But here's the thing, there seems to be this type of like really, I don't know how a nice way to phrase it. Like there's this really bad argument. That's the nicest way I can put it. Of, well, okay, Satan, some evils come about because of this Satan chap that he's here. So if we just took away this Satan chap, all those evils that he caused would be gone, and therefore everything would be better. And we should be able to recognize why this is a bad form of argument, just in reflection on things in our everyday lives. Let me give you an example. So recently, my wife had to get wisdom tooth surgery, and because of this surgery, that surgery has caused her some pain, some discomfort, some not being able to eat things, like some things that we don't like. Hasn't been too bad, actually, has been surprisingly fine, but there has been some pain and discomfort because of that. It would be silly for me to say, well, okay, the surgery is what caused that pain and discomfort. So if I just hadn't done that surgery, if we hadn't have done that in the first place, if she hadn't agreed to that, well, then everything would have been better. It was like, well, no, because the whole reason she got that surgery is because it was compacting her other teeth, and like she was having trouble even eating because it was like she was having trouble opening her mouth because of the effect of it there. So you can't just, if we say this thing causes this bad thing, we can't just take that out and be like, oh, everything would have been better. And here's the thing, this idea that I just gave, this is actually an idea we get, I think, pretty explicitly in Scripture. So in Matthew 13, Jesus gives the parable of the sower and the weeds. And I'm just going to read this because it's a short parable. So Jesus says, the kingdom of heaven may be compared to a man who sowed good seed in his field. But while his men were sleeping, his enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat and went away. So when the plants came up and bore grain, then the weeds appeared also. And the servants of the master of the house came and said to him, Master, did you not sow good seed in your field? How then does it have weeds? And he said to them, An enemy has done this. So the servant said, Then do you want us to go and gather them up? But he said, No, lest in gathering the weeds you root up the wheat along with them. Let both grow together until the harvest, and at harvest time I will tell the reapers, Gather the weeds first and bind them in bundles to be burned, but gather the wheat into my barn. So that is roughly the ESV translation of that. I paraphrased a few things there. Now, here's the thing. In this passage, Jesus goes on to explain that he is the one who sows the good seed. The devil is the one who sows the bad seed, and the field is the world. So Jesus is making it abundantly clear that the reason he does not immediately rip out the evil works of the devil is that if he does so, it's going to have a negative impact on the good that God is trying to bring about in the world. And the idea here is that the weeds are bad. Weeds shouldn't have been sown. But once they have been sown, the best thing to do for the sake of the wheat is to wait. So the answer for why God doesn't immediately destroy Satan is that doing so would be detrimental to the good that God is trying to bring about. Now, Mindshift is likely going to ask, well, okay, well, why would it be detrimental? What's the good that's at risk of being destroyed? And I have an idea on how to answer that, and I'll give that in a second. But here's the thing. I don't have to have an answer for that. We as Christians could sit back, shrug our shoulders, and be like, I don't know, that's a real humdinger. Yeah, that's one we'll have to figure out on the other side of the Jordan. And you know what that would entail if we responded in that way? Pretty much nothing. Nothing hangs on whether Christians are able to give the exact reasons that God has for doing every single thing he does. So with that said, then let me give you shortly the reason that I have for why I think destroying Satan could be detrimental, in addition to kind of the Lord of the Rings stuff that me and Mike have already talked about. So to kind of explain this concept, let's go back to the book of Job. So in the book of Job, Satan slanders God in the divine council. Satan attacks God's knowledge and character by saying God is wrong about Job. God brings up Job and says, hey, look at Job, isn't he great? And Satan says, you don't know what you're talking about to God. That's essentially the James Agnew paraphrase, right? And at that point, what is God going to do? So if God just kills Satan, that's not going to help God's case, or at least it might not help his case. So if a journalist accuses a sitting president of corruption and the president just kills the journalist, those claims of corruption aren't going to go away. Similarly, if God just kills Satan as soon as he slanders God in the divine court, not only is that accusation not being refuted to those who heard it, it may actually make the accusation stronger. So killing Satan may just be off the table. Well, what if God just ignores it? Well, at that point, you still have the slander being raised against God. And that slander, if left unanswered, may do some serious damage in the heavens, right? So Proverbs, I think it is, says that the first man to present his case sounds right until another stands and questions him. If Satan's accusation are unanswered, that may cause more of the heavenly host to join his side, right? They may be like, oh, this Satan chap, he seems like he's making some good points and God hasn't answered. Why is that? So what is God to do here? Well, in the story, which I don't know, maybe this is the only thing God can do, or maybe it's the best thing he can do, is certainly a reasonable thing, it seems, is that God refutes Satan's claims by showing him that he is wrong. God proves that Satan is wrong. God grants a certain degree of authority to Satan so that in afflicting Job, God defeats the allegations against him. Now, while Satan is afflicting Job, if God stepped in and stopped it, at that point, that would be disastrous. God would be breaking this type of, agreement that he had made with Satan for the parameters of the test, and God would be undermining his case that he's trying to make in the heavens. So this is a good example of an instance in which God just stepping in and stopping Satan, that could cause serious harm. So instead, God just lets the situation play out. Okay, so now let's ask ourselves this. What if this type of story that is going on in Job, what if that's going on like on a larger scale? What if this type of long-standing accusation in heaven against God, maybe even against humans? What if there's a great controversy, a great court case being played out, and all of humanity is part of that court case? I'm not going to go super into this idea here, but this is something I talk about in my book, and I developed this idea in my book. And here I'll just say it does a lot of heavy lifting with these questions regarding why God doesn't just destroy Satan. Put simply, this is a time in which God is allowing people to choose what side they're going to be on. Are they going to side with the Prince of Darkness, or are they going to side with the Prince of Light? God is letting his accuser make his arguments so that through this process, God can settle all of this once and for all. And then those of us who choose correctly, we don't ever need to entertain these accusations. Again, all of this song and dance that we're doing as humans, all of this suffering, this is just the prologue. God is getting this out of the way so that he and his people can get on with the plans that he has. If you're interested in more in that, again, look at my book, but I'm going to summarize this by saying nothing I just said is addressed by Mindshift in this video. Like, he has a section where he's going to bring up the 5 excuses that Christians make. He doesn't talk about the idea I just presented. And guess what? I didn't just invent all that stuff. All that stuff I just said about this idea of a great controversy or this cosmic court case, that's in the theological literature. So
yeah, and again, it relates back to the whole idea I was talking about earlier with triumph and soul building. I mean, those aspects are still very important, but I thought you brought up a good point, this idea of like, if God just destroyed Satan, it could cause more rebellion. Like, for the same reason, if a president killed a journalist, you would think, okay, well, there's some corruption going on here. So, I mean, like, there's a lot of other aspects, people don't really take into consideration here when they're thinking about these kinds of things. So with that, to keep us rolling, I'm going to play the next section we got signed up here.
So let us move on to part 2, the inaction of God. I think the first thing I'd like to do here is return to the Bible and just show in a few verses that God's inaction when it comes to this other agent is nothing new. Again, returning to Job, I think, is the easiest thing. And if you want more here, just go watch my Job video from my secular Bible study series. I cover a lot of these same points, but we have Satan asking to do something. And yeah, God sets some limits. What were the limits God set with Job? He just couldn't kill Job. Anything else was fair game, even to the tune of dead children. And not only did God endorse and condone this behavior from Satan himself, he stayed out of it. He kept his hands clean. He boasted about his power. He boasted about his knowledge. And yet he did nothing with that power and knowledge to know what would happen and to stop it from happening, to, protect the innocent life. Remember how Christians...
Okay, so we're talking about the Job's children being killed. Again, hard passage. I think it's a difficult thing that Christians need to address for sure. What are your thoughts on that? You go ahead and then I'll jump in.
Yeah, okay. So I already explained, what's going on with Job. And so let's start out by saying here, listen, if you're going to say that this is impermissible for God to allow Satan to do these things to Job, you're going to have to argue that the bad that comes about in the world from, these people dying or Job suffering, that's worse than what would happen if this accusation by Satan is not defeated in the heavens. Because if it's the case that this accusation left undefeated in the heavens, if that would bring about an even worse evil, if that would lead to, all of the heavenly hosts, abandoning their post and rebelling against God, and all of creation falling into disarray, guess what? That's even worse than all of Job's kids dying. Which, because again, as Christians, it's not like death is the end of the story. But so there are some problems there. But here's something. The reason I wanted to play this clip before he moves on is Mindshift shoots himself in the foot by going to Job here, because Mindshift later in this video, as we've talked about, he goes on this kind of thing about like, who can possibly stand against the father of lies? I mean, it's like putting a 2-year-old in a room with a serial killer. There's just no way we can stand against him. And then he goes to Job and he explicitly says God does nothing in Job. He says that God puts, these very few restrictions on Job. Hey, everybody, what's the one thing in Job that Job doesn't end up doing? Oh yeah, it's that one thing Satan was trying to get him to do. So Mindshift goes to Job to try to make his argument. But Job is an example of, like, even with all of this power given to him, Satan wasn't able to get Job to do this, to do this thing. And so I was like watching through this, and this happens several times with Mindshift, where he'll like make an argument in one section, and I'm just like, but wait a second, you're saying over here this, but you appealed to this verse and said this. And so that's why I wanted to talk about this verse. That's the main thing.
One thing I will say is that the problem of evil and suffering is not taking the full Christian worldview into account. Because you have to and I think I talked about this in my last responses to Mindshift, is that you have to take the idea that God is in a different layer of reality. So it's like comparing it to different worlds of inception. Like we are like in a dream world compared to where God is. When we die, we just go out of the dream world into God's world. Same with inception. So so the church fathers actually talked about this, because at the end of Job gets double everything, but only 7 children. He doesn't get 14. And church fathers said that's because his other 7 children are still there. They'll be with him in the resurrection. So he does get double of everything because his other 7 children are still there. From God's perspective, they're all still there, and they're all going to be with Job ultimately in the end. So God does double everything he has there. And so, like, if we're in like this dream world from an inception, sure, we're going to have certain roles because we are bound to this world, but not from God's perspective. He can move people from one plane of existence to another as he sees fit. And although it's hard for us, from God's perspective, he still has the people that he has chosen within his presence. So it's not this idea of God, like, when God ends a life because of his justice, it's not the same as a human ending a life. There's a huge ontological difference there that needs to be accounted for. All right, before we move on, I'm going to get to some of your super chats because they are piling up here. So let's do that. Why is partialism considered heretical? So you brought this up because you know James is a partialist. I think he has got a more nuanced view. But I mean, I think like the traditional reason is that we divide God into parts. Like Jesus is fully God. He's not just a part of God. And so I think that is the biggest problem with that. The Father is not just a part of God. As a monarchical Trinitarian, the Father is the one true God. And the Son and the Spirit are just God ontologically in a divine predicative sense. So
I have a video on my channel where I was interviewed by Big John Steele on, it's on my channel. It's called like, Is Partialism Valid? If you type that in, you'll be able to find it. And I address this idea as like, oh, is Jesus only 33% God? You know, stuff like that. I won't get into that here because this is Mike's live, but I would suggest people who are interested in that to go check that out. Yeah.
Well, you're wrong. So answer
okay.
I love Tolkien's writings. I love Tolkien's writings on people finding allegories in Lord of the Rings in his much better version, that he says he would have made it more direct. I'm trying to remember where he said that. Yeah, I can't remember off the top of my head. But no, he did say that it is a Catholic mythology, unconscious and then conscious in the revision aspects. So he did try to make it direct, but he also said that because it's a Catholic mythology, the theology is just woven into the story. It doesn't need to be explicitly stated. That's kind of what he was getting at with that. Yeah, that's why we don't have references to prayer or worship. It's in the mythology itself. Can you debate Mike Winger on if Catholics are Christian? His critiques of Catholics are causing some Christians to get a bit too tribal. Yeah, I disagree with his critiques, but I don't think Mike does debates on that kind of stuff. I don't think he really wants to, so that probably won't happen. But yeah. Thank you for becoming a YouTube member. George Bailey saves his brother, causes deafness. His deafness puts him in a position to save his town. Okay, so yeah, this is an example of how suffering brings about more good.
It's a Wonderful Life, isn't it? Isn't that what's being referenced?
I think so, yeah. I think that's it's hard to be. I know the name sounds familiar, but I don't remember the full story. So, but yeah, it's the same kind of thing. Why are we constantly writing stories about triumph if evil is so bad and it should not even exist? Like, should not be allowed to exist would be a better way to put it. My main theodicy revolves around the concept of triumph. Well, thank you for gifting 50 members.
Quick question.
That'll be a lot.
For the guy who just referenced It's a Wonderful Life, did your parents make you watch that at Christmas? I may not be able to find it in the chat, but I wanted to ask that. Sorry, keep going.
Yeah. So thanks for the gifting of 50 memberships. That's incredibly, I don't know who those are going to, but that's a lot. Much appreciated for that. All right, let's put the next clip up here. And we will continue on.
Hold up. Let's start with free will, the most ironic of the defenses. Well, if we didn't have this opposition to God, bringing in the chance for sin, bringing in temptation, bringing in the opportunity to go astray, then we're all robots for God. This is the greatest black or white fallacy, while at the same time actually doing the very thing it says it's trying to avoid. By having an actor in the world who can...
All right, what do you want to say about that?
Okay. So as we go through the 5 excuses, right? This is Brandon's 5 ways of refuting Christianity, right? Like, these are all just like a caricature of what a rational Christian would say. I don't think I've ever heard someone say prior to watching this video, or at least I cannot not recall anyone saying, yeah, the only way a creature can have free will is if there was this Satan guy messing with them. Like, that's not the idea. Like, if we were to represent the idea that Brandon is trying to engage with here, if we were to engage and construct that position, it's probably something like these type of things that Satan are doing, these come about. These are a consequent of, or an entailment of, the type of freedom, responsibility, authority, stuff like that God gives to his creatures. It's not that they're a necessary condition. It's not Satan messing with us is a necessary condition for us having free will. It's that if God gives people this type of freedom, free will, responsibility, stuff like that, an entailment of that is just some of them are going to probably go wrong. And I talk about in my book that if God wants to give people responsibility, and he wants to do it for, maybe he has this a couple of these goods he's trying to bring about from that. It may be that if he steps in and nips it in the bud every time somebody starts to do something he doesn't want, that's actually going to probably undercut the goods that he's trying to bring about, because then it doesn't seem like they're really responsible for anything. They actually don't have significance to their actions. And if what God is trying to do is he's trying to convince people and he's trying to reason and persuade them and things like that, what God might do, much like what Iluvatar does with Melkor, is God might allow the negative effects of an agent's actions to manifest so that they can see, like, oh no, this God, he actually knew what he was talking about. Like, he actually is this wise Most High. So he just is a character. Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to say, people don't realize we don't live in an episode of Touched by an Angel. And angels just can't come down and go, okay, here's your problem. You're being kind of selfish. People, that's not the way human psychology works. And this is why therapists, when they get new patients, they don't go, oh, the problem is you're a narcissist. Stop being a narcissist. That's not how human psychology works. That's not how psychology will work for any conscious free creature, I would argue. You have to be shown your problems. You have to come to learn what your problems are. And often that involves actually going through certain experiences so you learn more about yourself. We don't just live in an episode of Touched by an Angel where someone can come down, tell us all our problems, and we go, oh, you're right. Let me just fix all this. That's just not the way reality works. And that's not the way it would work with actual free creatures. It may work for like one-dimensional characters in a 90s show, but not in the real world.
Dude, man, first we had the red wall. Now we've got Touched by an Angel. Millennials must be feeling so represented in this stream tonight.
They better. So.
These are the most out of touch, outdated references. Like,
that's all right. We'll get through.
That's okay. Yeah, let's do it. I'm doing it too. I'm not flaming you. I'm doing it too.
Yeah.
Who can infiltrate spirits, who can lie, who can get in your head and convince you that a certain thing is true, even when it is untrue, that a certain thing is from God himself, even when it's actually from the enemy himself. This is inexcusable and a complete lack of free will. Think about what this being is: Lucifer, Satan, the devil, someone who is created way before humans. Who knows how many eons of knowledge and power Lucifer had while still in the heavenly host. His intellect, his powers versus some 15-year-old boy who's, by the way, past the age of accountability, some 30-year-old woman, some 80-year-old couple who makes the wrong choice. Are any of these a match for the father of lies? Think about how weak and feeble and immature and impossibly outmatched any human would be against this actual force. That very being acting in this.
Okay. Wow. He's just.
Who could stand against
power?
Who could stand against the Father of lies? I don't know. Maybe it's that Job character you explicitly, referenced in the beginning of this video, who withstood Satan. Yeah, it's. Sorry, go ahead. I was just.
No, I mean, like, again, it's the same fundamentalist upbringing. Like, it's like people just blame the devil on everything, and Christians do that, and that is wrong. And then, but atheists are doing it too. Like, that's just. He doesn't have that much power and influence. He can't take control of your mind. He can't possess you. Again, as even Jordan Paper, who's a polytheist, says, you can't be possessed unless you actively invite them in. Like, this idea you can accidentally get possessed, not a thing. So I don't understand where he's getting this idea that Satan has that much power.
Yeah. I don't know that I have anything else to add to that. I mean, I had the thought, I mean, listen, like, I don't think Satan has the power to make you believe something. Like, no, so there's a whole question here about, doxastic voluntarism and stuff like that. Like, do you choose your beliefs? But here's the thing, you can choose to engage in and operate with uh, epistemic virtues. You can choose to exhibit epistemic virtues. And one thing that entails is that when you're presented with these ideas, you don't jump to conclusions. You do research. You look and see what the opposing side has to say. These are things that Brandon clearly has not done. I mean, maybe he's engaged with the opposing side by reading his comment section, but the videos that I've seen by him I don't walk away from these being like, well, at least he engaged with some, Christian academics on this. Like, this is yeah.
Now, he may bring up the example of Saul, because in Samuel it says like the demons came and possessed him, but we're not given details on how that occurred. We know Saul went to like the witch of Endor to try to do necromancy. So he may have already been engaging in demonic practices and opening himself up here. It doesn't actually say like they possessed him against his will. It just says this happened without further details of how they got there. So I want to address that potential objection beforehand in case it comes up. So. All right, let's play the next section.
One last thing. It's like, listen, guys, I also take the position that like God's a fair judge. If it really is the case that you were just like completely outmatched in something you were tempted to do and you ended up doing it, God's gonna know that. Like, God's gonna take that into account. You know what I mean?
And
like,
that's in scripture. Okay, so John 9:41, John 15:22, when he's talking about the Pharisees, he says, if I had not come, they would not be guilty. Now that I have come, they have no excuse. That implies people who God has not delivered a message to have an excuse. Romans 5:13, sin is not counted where there is no law. If certain humans have not been given the law, sin is not counted. Acts 17:30. In the past, God overlooked times of ignorance, but now he calls all to repent. Okay. God is a fair judge. We see that directly in scripture. If Satan had this absolute power, God will judge fairly. It's okay.
Yeah, and the idea is like the times of ignorance are the times where Satan had the most influence on the earth. Like, that's not now. You don't know why? Because Christians have been going around wrecking his kingdom. We've been, like, not me personally, other Christian missionaries have been going in and just casting out demons and destroying these pagan shrines and stuff like that and bringing about God's kingdom on earth. So you are not in an epistemic position comparable to like those in the ancient Near East. At least this is a position I would hold to. Like, you're the a lot of, I mean, I'm not saying there's no influence by Satan and stuff like that, but you gotta take account and take responsibility for the part you're playing in those.
And victory. God is supposedly all-powerful, correct? So there has to then be another way that God could achieve this same outcome with less harm as a byproduct. If there's not another way, God's not all-powerful. And the very
okay, now we're just appealing to ambiguity or vagueness. That's not what all-powerful means. All-powerful does not mean you can do anything. Powerful means you have power over everything else in existence, even if everything else was combined against you. You are still all powerful. So no thing or combination of things in existence could ever overpower you. It does not mean the ability to do everything.
Yeah, so I have a video on my channel titled something like, what does it mean to be omnipotent? If you go to my channel and you just type in omnipotent or omnipotence, it's like the first thing that comes up. And it's like 6 minutes. And in it, I'm just reading from a short section in my dissertation where I survey kind of a variety of attempts of defining and explaining what omnipotence is. And the whole reason I do that in my dissertation is to point out like, hey, listen, there's pretty widespread agreement no matter how we cash this out, whether it's like act omnipotence or states of affairs omnipotence or power-based omnipotence. Like, no matter how we cash it out, there's pretty widespread agreement that omnipotence doesn't entail the ability to do things that are like logically impossible or immoral or things like that. And making a free creature do something, that's a logical contradiction. If they're being made to do it, then it's not free. And so if what God wants to bring about, if the ends that he's working towards here are for free creatures to come up to do something, it's not the case that his omnipotence just entails that he could do this in a different way, because how his ends can be brought about and under what conditions, it's not just him that's in that equation. Like, he's working around us and in our free decisions and things like that. So no, this is not an accurate understanding of omnipotence. This is just kind of a general, I see this happen a lot with internet atheists, where they're just like, well, if God can't do X, no matter what I plug into X, then God's not all powerful. And usually it's sometimes, I don't know if Brandon would do this, but sometimes there's just like this foot stomping where it's like, if you say, well, like, oh no, omnipotence doesn't entail that, they're just like, well, then he's not really all powerful.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, okay, well then according to the definition you're using, he's not all powerful. And it's like, okay, great. Then I don't think God's all powerful according to that definition. But I'm just going to sleep well at night knowing that that's not a definition that reflects Christian tradition. And I also don't think this is just Christian tradition. Like, I'm not as well versed in like Judaic and like Islamic tradition, but I'm also pretty sure they talk about omnipotence in similar ways when it comes to like not doing things that are illogical or immoral or things like that.
Yeah, I mean, it just goes back to the idea that we're also just appealing to ambiguity. Like somehow a finite creature can know there was a better way, but God, who's omniscient, a finite creature knows more than an omniscient God. There was a better way. You can't say that. And even I've seen even atheist philosophers agree that that's going too far. Like, if God does exist, he would know the best way to bring about the most virtues, to bring about the most triumph. And this might be that way. So like, you're assuming from a finite, limited understanding to know more than an omniscient God. And if the explanation is, well, God could have done something better. How do you know that? How do you know, given this thing? And going back to what you were saying earlier, maybe if he destroyed Satan, there would be more rebellions, there'd be even worse rebellions. Like, we're assuming a lot of things here, which are not inherent in the actual worldview itself, that have just not simply been answered. So there's just so many issues here that have not been justified in terms of his objections.
Yeah, and so if you wanted to get like really more precise on talking about this idea, like how you're going to respond to it is going to be dependent on what type of view you have when it comes to divine sovereignty. So if you're a Molinist, you could be like, well, listen, it may just be that because of the facts, the counterfactual truths regarding creaturely freedom, it may just be that any world in which I choose to do X, that's a world in which there's a whole bunch of suffering. Like, and you could just say, listen, that's just how the counterfactual, dice have landed. And so like you were saying, Brandon's going to make a claim there. If you're an open theist, you wouldn't use that response, but you would just say, like, listen, all these claims about I would do this if that, like, those are just literally not true under, like, at least under most open theist standpoints. They either don't have truth value or they're just flat out false. So no matter what view of divine sovereignty you take here, like, you're going to have a response that's like, wait a second, you can't, that's, you're putting a burden on yourself that's not going to work.
Yeah. All right, let's play the next section. We got time marked.
Was an analogy, because analogies are what bring it home for me. That's what really helps me understand how ridiculous some of these concepts are. Imagine a CEO, this will be God, and he sees that one of his top people is embezzling money. Now, what should the CEO do right then and there? If you're honest, you would say he should address it. He should fire and or go after legally the embezzler, because the individual embezzler, not everyone else, needs to be punished. That punishment can be a lesson to others, and it will be protecting all the others who work at that company by keeping that company afloat, by keeping it healthy, therefore ensuring the potential growth, comfort, and security of all the other workers. But what if
all right, so first of all, embezzler sounds like the name of a character you can be in Dungeons and Dragons. Like, you can be the mage or the paladin or the embezzler. But no. All right. So what are your thoughts on that?
I just like that. It's like, no, but it's an off-brand Dungeons and Dragons game where they're like worried about trademark problems. So it's like, I am the embezzler. Yeah. So okay. So Mindshift, he creates several analogies in this video. And just in general with these analogies, I'm like, why in the world should I think that these are like comparable to the, Christian framework? Like, they're just asserted. And I'd be like, in most of these analogies, I'm be like, well, why isn't it this framework? Why isn't it this framework? But tell you what, I actually like this embezzler analogy because it's going to shoot him in the foot again. So let's just go with this, embezzler analogy. Okay, I'm a CEO, and oh no, I've got this guy who's embezzling. Now, according to Mindshift, what I should do is I should try to make it the case that legal action is brought about and that this guy can't continue to hurt my company. Guess what? It's plausible that there are instances in which, in this scenario, I may want to wait. Well, if I'm going to fire someone, I need to make sure I have evidence. I need to make sure that I'm not going to be hit with a wrongful termination lawsuit. I need to make sure that I have enough evidence to give to the authorities. I may want to wait and see and build a case against the embezzler. I may want to wait and see if maybe something doesn't add up. And like, oh, maybe he's working with someone else in my company, so I may set up a type of sting operation. There is a plausible explanation in this very analogy he's trying to use in which, yeah, it can make sense to just not do this knee-jerk reaction of immediately destroying the guy who's doing the thing. And this is something we all recognize. Like in chess, there are times where you may wait, you may draw out your opponent, or even like law enforcement, they engage in sting operations. They make deals with criminals to go after bigger fish, things like that. So this embezzler analogy it's not going to get them anywhere, and I think it actually works way better with the framework that we're talking about.
Yeah, well, you talked about the whole. I think the analogy you gave earlier with the journalist and the president aspect was very good. But also, I mean, like, he could also reply, "Well, God's omniscient. He would need to wait to find more information." But if that's the case, the analogy doesn't compare at all. So why even bring it up?
Yeah, but see, what I would say is like, well, just like if I'm the CEO and I know he's embezzling, it's not just about what I know; it's what I can show in a court of law, and it's what I can, show to the partners at my firm or whatever. And I think that God isn't just concerned about what he knows; He's trying to show to the heavenly host. He's trying to show to those who he's being slandered to in the heavens about what's going on. So whether or not God's omniscient, that doesn't matter, because God's trying to display the corruption. In my view, I would say God's trying to display the guilt of the embezzler to everyone. So
yeah, very big YouTuber in the chat. Nice to see you, Dark Matter 2525. Hope you're doing well. All right, let's play the next section here.
But let's move on to the third one, which is similar to the first two. It's moral and spiritual growth. You need an enemy. You need to be able to be tempted and even give in and lose to recognize what a sinner you are, how weak you are as a person. And only in that understanding can you properly grovel. Can you properly see your place as a creature of the dirt who needs a savior? Then you can start to be morally perfected. Is it impossible to gain this knowledge in the world that we have, even with suffering, even with sin, without having this other enemy force? Like,
okay. So it seems like he's trying to relate to the whole idea.
Play it until because we already played some in here too. Let's just combine this one with the next timestamp of take it to 22:15. Yeah.
Again, maybe I should back up. This black or white fallacy that without Satan, everything could be perfect. It doesn't have to be. If God still wants there to be trial and tribulation, he can cause that. Do your own dirty work, God. But at least then we would know, supposedly, if this God is actually good, that every single thing he is doing for us to bring us closer and to save the individual. When it's handed over.
Okay, that was really shooting yourself in the foot there.
Yeah, he's the one who was like, so he says we're committing a black and white fallacy by saying, oh, well, if Satan was in here, everything would be perfect. That's his argument in the beginning of this video. Like, that's what he says. Like, oh, if Satan guy wasn't here, it'd be all hunky-dory. At least he may not explicitly say that. It seems to be what he's implying. So I'll go ahead and say what you say, and then I'll say some remarks about this.
No, continue what you were saying. I'm trying to just get all my thoughts, because I was just like, I can't believe he said that.
Okay, so there's a lot going on here. So first off, let's talk about the idea of this is also a caricature of what the type of Christian response is going to be. So I think the idea he's trying to engage with here is something like a soul-building theodicy, which you've talked about before. This idea of like, okay, suffering, stuff like that can be used by God in order to bring about building our souls or spiritual growth, stuff like that. That's not to say that it has to be Satan who's inflicting this stuff on us to make things work. That's not the position. It's just in general the idea that God can use this suffering to bring about certain moral good, spiritual growth, stuff like that. So I don't think he's accurately representing the position. But then it gets really bizarre, because then he and so like my position, like how we talked about at the very beginning of the stream, it doesn't have to be one or the other. So like God can use the evil of Satan, just as a Iluvatar can use the evil of Melkor, while also, communicating things to the divine host, while also, creating the possibility of freedom and stuff like that. It's not one or the other. You can combine these things. So I can say, hey, listen, God allows Satan to do all this stuff, and it has this, cosmic court case stuff going on. That's kind of the main thing that's going on. But also, God is redeeming and using that evil, and he's working that to the good of his creature. So it's not like oh man, this sucks, but I'm just have to go with it. Like God's like, oh no, even this I can make good of this and build it to, kind of the theme that Iluvatar is playing.
Going back to Tolkien's world building, the whole idea in the Silmarillion, the same thing.
Yeah. So then like he has this idea. So he goes on to then say, well, do your own dirty work, God. And he seems to suggest, I think it's after the clip that we just played, he seems to suggest that this would be better if God just did it all himself, because then like, at least we would know, or something like that. But that doesn't make any sense, because at the beginning of this video, he takes a bunch of Old Testament verses and he implies that all the cosmic baddies, well, they're really just agents of God, and God's the one who's doing it. So on one hand, he's saying, well, it seems like he's implying that, oh, well, this would be better if God was the one who was just doing it and there was no intermediary figure. But then earlier in this video, when he's making an accusation and saying, well, it's really God who's doing all this, and that's why, this is silly and stuff like that. So it's just, as is often the case in this video and in Mindshift in general, it's just like, pick your argument and stick to it, because you can't have your cake and eat it too here.
Well, that's like, this is what I was, Than and I, so Than Christophilus and I responded to Mindshift a few months ago about him making the case God was evil for doing certain things.
Yeah.
Like, now he's trying to say that God should be doing those evil things. Like God should be doing those things. So a few months ago, he was mad when Than and I responded to him that God would do certain things to Abraham or to Moses. And now he's admitting that maybe God should be doing those things if he can use it to bring about a greater good. Like, pick a narrative, sir. Like, were you not the guy we were responding to a few months ago where you were claiming God was evil because he was intentionally like doing certain things to bring about greater goods, like sending like he brought up the idea of Abraham sending Ishmael away, and we responded and said, like, God in his omniscience could know this would create far more problems if Ishmael stayed with Isaac, a lot more strife possibly. Maybe him sending away is actually a good thing. So God is doing the dirty work according to Mindshift. He was upset about it a few months ago. Now he's upset that he's not. Like, what do you want? Like, and again, even if Satan didn't rebel, that doesn't mean there could not have been other beings who could have rebelled. I mean, we rebelled. It's not like Satan forced us to. Like, we rebelled regardless. Like, so it's ridiculous. And people try to say, well, if Satan wasn't there, humans would never rebel. That's not necessarily the case. C.S. Lewis responds to this and points out, like, the moment you have a self, you have the thought you could put yourself before another self or before God himself. That itself is where the sin comes from, and any being can come up with that. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, like, and just a quick caveat, like, for people, I don't want people to accuse us of this. We know that in the book of Job, it's the Satan. It's not a proper name yet. Yeah. We know that. We fully understand that. We've read Heiser. There's still a case to be made. It could be the accuser himself who later it's given him as a proper name. But yeah, just want to make sure we're not taken out of context later. So, all right, let me get the next section up here.
Let's do it. Yeah, I think the next section is where I could be accused of being petty in this next section, but like
I'll let you be petty. Okay, this is a short section here. Yeah,
it's real short. Okay, wait, pause it real quick. Okay.
They are isolated.
What? So I need to give context to this clip. Rewind it a little bit while I give context. Like, you need to take it like 10 seconds back. So the context of this clip is he's giving another analogy, and the analogy is a teacher who is like beating a student, who is just like being really cruel and beating a student to try to like teach them and stuff like that. And so this is the analogy he's giving. And so, okay, now you can play this clip.
Okay.
They are punished. They are struck. They are embarrassed. They are isolated. They are anything negative in the world that could ever even bring about a positive return. The idea from this teacher is, if we don't beat,
okay, you can pause it. Okay. I wrote out this statement, and people in the chat can see if they can understand what this statement means. They are everything negative in the world that could even bring about a positive return. What does that statement mean? I have looked at this. I have no clue what he's saying. And the reason I say this may just be me being petty is maybe this is just a slip up. Like, slip ups happen. Like, sometimes, like, we're trying to say one thing, we say something else. But when I listen to Mindshift, like, it seems like he's just firing from the hip a lot of the times with his arguments, and he's like not being rigorous. And so he'll say things like this, and I'm like, I don't know how to respond to this, because like I don't know the propositional content of the statement you just made. Because at the beginning of this sentence, it's like, they are everything negative in the world. Okay, I'm on board. Okay, so they're everything negative. And then he turns to, that could even bring about a positive return. Like, wait, what? Like, now it seems it's positive. Like, which one is it? I've looked at this, and I'm just like, I don't understand what's going on here. And this is consistent with like the type of confusion when I'm like listening to Mindshift. I'm like, wait, what's his argument? Like, when he's talking about sovereignty, like, he's like, okay, here's the, I don't know, remember, like, second or third excuse, and it's sovereignty. But then I'm listening to it, and I'm like, wait, what is he lumping under sovereignty? Is this like a Calvinist, like God's sovereign defense? Is this just like, the fact that, we don't have to know, like, what's going on here?
I just say maybe he meant to say something, he misspoke. I've done it before. I was in a debate and I wrote the words out, and then as I'm reading them, I misspoke. I forgot to say the word not, so I said the opposite. Like, it happens. Like, he probably was trying to say something that did not translate well, I'd say.
I've done it too, and that's why I said this may just like this. I'll give him the out here, because I remember I was doing a video on Islam once, and I reversed. I don't know whose name I was trying to say, but I said the words. It was supposed to be 1, 2, 3, and I said like 2, 1, 3, and like all the Muslims in my comments just like blew it up. And I'm like,
see, he doesn't know what he's talking about.
Yeah, it's Ibn Allah, whatever. And I was like, oh, whatever, guys. I'm a human too. So that's why I was like, okay, maybe I'm just being wrong. But I had to point that out, just because even if it is a slip up on his part, these type of statements, they confuse me, and like they make it difficult to respond to Mindshift, because I just honestly sometimes I don't know what their argument is.
Yeah. All right, let's get the next section going.
Would you expect that teacher, by the way, to be aware enough, smart enough, psychologically sound enough to utilize some positive reinforcement at least? Is there no beneficial way of morally improving someone? I've been in management for a long time, and one of the simplest things I've ever learned is not to try to catch people doing things wrong, but to try to catch people doing things right. You catch someone doing something wrong and you shame them for it, even if it's to try to help them grow from it. Yes, it might stick. Yes, you might actually get a desired outcome the next time, but you're not changing a core behavior. But if you catch someone doing something right, what they naturally were doing without you having to always have a carrot and a stick, and you recognize that, to build around that, you're going to get way better performance from a way better individual. I can recognize this with a few decades under my belt and a couple good management books, but the God of all creation can't see anything other than carrot and stick, beat them when they're down, introduce the worst possible thing into the world to create the most possible harm ever with.
Okay, a lot of assumptions there that I think we've already addressed beforehand. But I mean, like, for one thing, just look at the story of Scripture. How long does God have patience and long suffering with Israel before he finally says, all right, enough? Like, he's not trying to catch them in the bad thing when he's waiting generations of sin before he's finally like, all right, I have to do something.
Well, let's talk about the covenant blessings. Like, where do you get in this idea that God doesn't do positive reinforcements? Like, he has all these blessings. God's like, yeah, this is what I'm gonna give you all this positive stuff if you're like obedient and you follow my ways. And he's like, and if you don't, all these bad things are gonna happen. Like, yeah, God says, Jesus says, those who persevere to the end, they're gonna reign with me, or they're gonna sit on my throne, or something like that. Like, God does positive reinforcement stuff, but also, like, does Mindshift not recognize that part of teaching a person something, like, I don't have kids, but hypothetically, if I did, that'd be a bad situation because I'd be a bad dad. But hypothetically, if I had kids, I feel like part of being like a parent is teaching your kids that actions have consequences. And like, hey, sometimes if you do this, I'm not going to necessarily cut off the bad consequences, because you need to learn. Like, you need to learn that there are negative things here. And Mindshift's also like failing to recognize, like, everyone who lives in a society recognizes positive reinforcement's not enough. Like, we have laws, we have prisons, we have judicial systems, because giving someone a sticker every time they do something good doesn't change the fact that there are still people who are going to do stuff wrong. And so there are just multiple layers of this objection where I'm just like, what? Like, this doesn't make any sense.
There's a lot of assumptions. And I mean, there's just so many times where God like is doing positive reinforcement, like with David, or like with Jesus and the disciples, or like this is constantly happening throughout the Bible. So like he does it with Jeremiah. I mean, like that just seems kind of like a really weird argument that I don't think translates well. So
no.
God's going to win in the end, because Satan will finally be destroyed. If you really believe that, first of all, I'd encourage you to watch this video. In this video, I show that if even one person is burning in hell forever, that God, as the person who created all of this, who didn't have to, who was under no requirements, who did so only for his own glory, that if he's serious about desiring none to be lost, and even one is lost, God lost. Evil won. We know how many people.
Okay, God lost if one is lost. First of all, I mean, like, there are universalists like David Bentley Hart. So, I mean, that is a position within Christianity. I don't see why that's not even considered. Like, that's not even entertained. But what are your thoughts, James?
So the reason I say to include this clip is I have an hour-long response video to the video that he just referenced. So like his God Lost video, if you want to see me just complain about that video for an hour and go through it, kind of like what we're doing here, I have that. But I'll give you the too long didn't watch. It's literally like, if the fact that God doesn't want anyone to be lost and someone ends up lost, then that just means evil won. which like should strike everyone as an incredibly weird win condition to put on God. Like, let's imagine you and I are playing chess and I take one of your pawns and I'm like, aha, I win. All I had to do is take one of your pawns. Aha. Like, and you're like, wait a second, I just checkmated you. It doesn't matter because my win condition is different than your win condition. Like, my win condition is if I take one of your pawns and aha, I got you. Like, that's the type of weirdness here. So, like, the Christian position is that death is ultimately destroyed. Satan is either destroyed or cast into the lake of fire. Like all tears are wiped away. All of this, like evil is defeated. It doesn't get a place anymore in creation. You're gonna tell me that's how things end up, but you still think evil won because Timmy decided that he was gonna rebel against God. Like these are just weird, bizarre win conditions. And if you think I'm misrepresenting that video, like I'm not. Like that's really pretty much the gist of his argument.
What's the name of the video where you respond to him?
It's called "Did God Lose?" Responding to Mindshift.
Let me see. Let me see. I think I see it right here. I just want to show it for everybody so they can. So yeah, there it is. It's right there. So yeah. Okay. So all right. Yeah. So I didn't see that one. I'll check that one out. So yeah. All right. Cool. I did not realize you got that. So yeah. So I'll try to link that in the video description after we're done streaming so that we have that up. And let me jump to the next clip here. So here we go.
Tell you what, so some of this puzzle clip, why don't you jump to the last one, 27, because some of these other two are ones we've talked about, and I see we're coming up on 2 hours.
Yeah, we've kind of addressed a lot of his main points. Again, as I've said to my viewers many times, I understand we're not playing every part of his video. We're trying not to quote mine. What we're trying to do is hit the main points. I apologize if we do quote mine. We're not perfect. That's not our goal. So I just want to make sure that we want to be here for 4 hours is what I'm just trying to say. All right.
And as an excuse, come on. If you were in a relationship with someone, I'm jumping straight to the analogy here, and you've told them you've loved them, and maybe the two of you have even been through some hard things. You've been through some personality differences. Maybe you lost someone close to you and you had to deal with that together. Maybe there's been some hurt from between each other. You've already had to go through many things and also many positive things that brought the two of you closer. But one person in this relationship continues for the entirety of the relationship. There's never a reached end to put the other person through trials and tests just to make sure that they're loved. You know, like beat them just to see if they'll stick around. I'm just testing your love for me. By the way, this is exactly what God did with Job. So if when I said that a second ago, you thought, ugh, and now you're trying to make an excuse for God who just clearly did that in Job, I think you have some cognitive dissonance you should work out. And I'm not trying to be a jerk because I made.
All right. Do we have cognitive dissonance when it comes to Job?
I mean, I think I've been pretty consistent in my interpretation of Job, unlike Mindshift, which he's kind of contradicted himself in one video in this one video. But here's the thing. So let's talk about this idea of testing people. This idea of testing people makes a lot of sense in a type of cosmic conflict, cosmic lawsuit framework that I put forward. Because like, okay, let's imagine a courtroom drama. Like my wife and I have been binge watching Suits, so this is very fresh on my mind. So okay, so like I'm the prosecutor, you're the defendant, or something like that. I get up and we have a witness, and I get my witness to say a bunch of stuff. Ooh, it makes my case look really good. I'm feeling great. I sit down and say, okay, no more questions, Your Honor. I sit down. Then what happens? Well, potentially what you want to do is you want to get the chance to cross-examine my witness, right? Like, he's like, all right, they said a bunch of stuff that, jives with the position you're trying to make. Well, now I want to have a turn at them. And, sometimes they say, oh, permission to treat the witness as hostile. So there are times in the New Testament where Satan is depicted as wanting to test people. And specifically, it's Satan is the one who wants to test them, or Satan is the one who's doing the testing. So this is like, I think it's Luke 22, where Jesus says Satan demanded to sift you like wheat. And then in Revelations 2, Jesus says something like, stay strong, hold fast, because Satan is going to throw some of you into prison that you may be tested, or something like that. Well, here's the thing, like, why would Satan want to test us, right? And there's also this idea in Revelations 12 of Satan is cast out of heaven, and this angel saying, okay, he's gone, he's been defeated, he's been conquered by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. So there's this idea of what we do here. Like, I have this conception I develop in my book. I won't get super into it here, but I have this idea of the things we do here on earth can contribute to the things that are going on in this cosmic court case, or this cosmic court case, or this, cosmic lawsuit. And I think Satan's wanting to test people because he's wanting to to degrade our testimony. Like he's wanting to be like, oh, like listen, he actually doesn't follow you. It's like the same thing with Job. He wants to be like, no, he doesn't actually think you're good. He's just siding with you because you're so good to him. I think that's, at least in the New Testament, the ideas of conceptions of testing that's going on. It's Satan testing us so that this that our testimony can be made even stronger and can be useful in this in divine counsel sense. And imagine that there's a court in which the judge is like, okay, no, you're not allowed to cross-examine him. He made his case, you're not allowed to cross-examine. Wouldn't we be like, this is really weird? This doesn't seem fair. It seems like there needs to be
God controlling everything. God controlling everything. There'd be no like, basically would be just strings on puppets on strings at this point, you know. And it's like that cruel dictator who just controls everything. If we live in that type of country, we immediately want freedom. We want to be able to have different views, hear other sides, this kind of thing.
Yeah, no, I will say that, so I think there are some instances in scripture where we can cash this out as like the testing that's being done is because of Satan and this cosmic framework. There are some other sections of testing in scripture where I'm like, maybe that's at play, but there also seems to be other themes at play. So for instance, okay, so let me say this first because this would go with what I just said. So we all know the binding of Isaac, the Akita. There's actually Jewish interpretation or Jewish lore, I don't know if you call it that kind of suggests like, oh, the reason God did this is because like Satan was making accusations against Abraham, and then like this was to kind of prove him wrong. So there's actually some Jewish thought about that idea. But so you have things like the binding of Isaac and the testing of Abraham, and something like Deuteronomy, I think it's 8:2, where God says something like, I tested you in the wilderness to see what was in the heart, to see whether or not you follow me. As an open theist, I would be like, yeah, God's testing these people who he's about to do this whole song and dance with. He's about to make them into his great people because he's wanting to see how they're going to respond and you know, see their hearts before he takes them and does this use with them. But even if you don't want to go that direction, you could still be like, okay, well, like maybe the testing of God in that situation, maybe that also kind of had this divine cosmic conflict lawsuit stuff going on there. So I do want to just note those because you could object and you could say, hey, listen, maybe the stuff with Satan demanding to test people in the New Testament, maybe you can cash that out in a cosmic conflict like lawsuit way. But are all these Old Testament stuff that way? I'm going to say like, I don't probably think so because I'm convinced by like open theist arguments. But if you're not, like maybe you can find an interpretation there. But.
Well, I mean, it's the same thing I said back earlier. It's not that God is testing for his knowledge. It's for our knowledge. It's about going through the experiences to learn where our loyalty is. I mean, again, we don't live in an episode of Touched by an Angel. Like that's just simply not the way it works. And the analogy of it being in a relationship where the one person is constantly testing the other, that doesn't compare because in this world, we have a perfect God who's dealing with imperfect people, and constantly we are rebelling. We're constantly turning from him. So, I mean, like a better analogy would be if you have a relationship and someone is always cheating on the other person, you'd probably do a little bit more testing, especially to see where they could figure out where their loyalties are. And sometimes I've actually seen clips where someone tests their spouse and their spouse realizes, you know what, maybe I don't want to be in this relationship. Like this, I mean, I've come to this realization by going through this test that maybe this isn't what I want. And so again, if Mindshift's analogy doesn't work because it's not a good comparison, the perfect God and us who are constantly cheating on God would be a far better analogy. And so often what someone in that situation would do is they'd want to test the person so the person would know if they truly do want to be in this relationship. Sometimes you don't know until you go through certain experiences. That's a common thing when it comes to our psychology. So there's a lot of issues there. I don't think the analogy actually captures this well, and that's why it just simply doesn't work. It's not a good analogy.
Yeah, if someone continues to make a so if you like, I like to have an Aristotelian conception of like good and evil as things we practice. So like if every time you choose to do something good, every time you choose to do something evil, you're practicing good, or you're practicing evil. And so when God's testing you, he's, if you want to do it in this type of soul building theodicy framework that Mike's talking about, you could say something like, listen, at first, it's really difficult when he tests us. You're like, this is, I'm really, really on the fence here. I wrestle with it a lot. But through that continual testing, like through that continual process, you're practicing following God. You're practicing doing the right thing. And each decision you make, you're kind of, how C.S. Lewis would describe it, you're turning that little dial in yourself more and more towards God, more and more towards being a heavenly creature. And so you could cash out this testing language and this concept, testing idea. You could cash that out in a soul building theodicy. I don't know that like I'm not gonna get into an open theist with you, but I think guys like I don't know if you can say that all the instances in which God tests people in the Old Testament are for the people's knowledge, not God's. But that's a video for another day.
Oh,
I
I
don't want to
could.
derail this.
Yeah, I've gone through certain things. I want to do a video eventually on Abraham and Isaac, and so that kind of stuff is what I'm eventually going to get to.
We should talk then after the credits are all in this video, because I'm interested to hear that.
Yeah, it's something I'm still working on. So, but yeah, we can talk about it. So, all right, let me get to some super chats here. Channel member Terrence says, "Can inspiring philosophy answer my question? Why don't people get possessed these days? Because we don't live in cultures where paganism is rampant, where people are actively trying to seek out these demons and interact with them. That's one thing. Christianity has spread, and the more Christianity spreads, we would expect less demonic possession, because as the kingdom spreads, the kingdom of Satan diminishes. So we should see far less of it today, which is related to what we actually see. So that's why we're not constantly contacting demons like the ancient pagans were." Unrelated, but what are your thoughts on Soren Kierkegaard's work? I've been working through Fear and Trembling, and I found it very interesting. Fear and Trembling is a great book. A lot of his stuff is very complicated, hard to understand. I like Exclusion and Embrace. I think that's Miroslav Volf's book. What's the Kierkegaard book I'm thinking of that I like a lot? Crap, I completely forgot it. I'll have to look that up here. I mentioned it in my video on hell. Does God send people to hell? So yeah, maybe it is Fear and Trembling. I can't remember now. I just completely blanked on it. So apologize for that. But he's a very complicated writer. I disagree with some of his concepts about rejecting the aspect of apologetics. But I mean, I think he's a very complicated writer that's very deep stuff. Thank you for becoming a member. Much appreciated. Do you have any thoughts on Kierkegaard, by the way?
I'm gonna bring up a link for that. 1 second.
Okay.
Keep going. Sorry, I'll send a link in the chat for people if I can find it.
Is there any biblical church father support for eventual annihilationism? Yeah, I go to like 1 Thessalonians, where it says they're exiled from his presence and then to face destruction. So God exiles people from his presence after they're dead, and then they face destruction. So it's not like he's causing the destructions. And this is in Thessalonians. So that's one of the verses I go to. Barry says, watch Bible Project on Jonah. It has some good ideas. Yeah, I like a lot of stuff Bible Project does. I don't think Jonah was swallowed by a giant sea creature, though. I don't think that's what the text is saying. I think he was swallowed by Leviathan, which is the representation of watery chaos. So he's swallowed by the sea. Then he dies. He goes down to Sheol, and then he's brought back to life. So he's resuscitated. He's not actually swallowed by a whale ever. The text has a lot of allusions to Leviathan. And Leviathan is just a personification of watery chaos. Jonah dies. He doesn't live in the belly of a fish for 3 days. It says he goes down to Sheol, and then God brings him up from the pit. So he's resurrected, in a sense. Resuscitated would be a better way to put it. So I was going
to say, I put a link in the chat, both in our chat and on StreamYard, and in the chat of a comic about Kierkegaard that I think the philosophy people in the chat, if you're familiar with Kierkegaard, you'll find it amusing. Yeah.
Says I meant to say Job, not Jonah. Yeah, I'll take a look at some of that. I appreciate it. Biblical evidence on post-human salvation. So I think 1 Peter 4:6 talks about gospel being preached to the dead. I don't like the Calvinist interpretations of that. I think they're a little bit ad hoc. That's one of the ones I would go to for sure. Trying to think if there's another.
James Bealby has a book called Postmortem Opportunity, which is really good. If you're talking about postmortem opportunities for salvation, James Bealby's book it's well researched, and it's very even-handed. Like he's not going to overstate his position or overstate the evidence, and I thought it was very good.
Yeah, I'll check that out. It's not something I've had time to really look into. I've always taken it from a philosophical approach. I don't think there's anything which says that once we die, God just stops loving us in the sense the way he loves us in this life. So
yeah,
my response to that is, however, it's much harder at that point because of the soul building that has already occurred.
Mm-hmm.
And most people won't go to heaven for what C.S. Lewis basically narrates out in his book, The Great Divorce. They'd have to stand before the judgment seat, answer for their sin, reject the identity they spent a life building. And so it's just exceptionally rare. It wouldn't happen.
I'll give like a really, if you want to say like, okay, besides besides philosophical ideas, because philosophical ideas are important here. So like from a scriptural standpoint, so in This is not in, depending on what canon you use, for all the Catholics out there. It's in one of the Maccabees. I think it's in Second Maccabees. There's a prayer where he prays for the people that are dead, because I'm going to give like a really nutshell summary of this. It's like he finds idols or something that they weren't supposed to have on them, of like this dead soldiers or something like that, and he prays for them. He prays for the dead people and like for their salvation, or something along those lines. So there's this idea in Christian literature of like praying for the dead and there being hope for them. And then in the New Testament, you have the idea of Jesus going down to Sheol, going to the pit, and preaching to the spirits in bondage. That's a point that Bilby references in his book, which is the idea of like for preaching there, like it's just kind of the general word that's used for like evangelism, like preaching the gospel.
Yeah.
And then and then in patristics, this is the last thing I'll say. And then like in patristic thought, there seems to be the conception of postmortem opportunity, at least in some early works. So in the Passion of, I think it's Perpetua and Felicity, I don't know how to pronounce it, there's a conception of like this woman sees her, I think it's her brother, and he's like suffering, he's in agony, and then she prays for him, and then she gets another vision, and the brother's dead, and so she like prays for him, and then she gets like another vision of like, hey, he's in heaven, like this is cool, you know, like he's been healed, stuff like that. And then I think it's John Chrysostom. So I think it's Chrysostom who, and I couldn't tell you this reference off the top of my head, where it's like this woman, her husband dies, and she's like, like my husband died and he's outside the faith. And the response of this church writer is like, that's why we have prayers for the dead. Go use those. And so like if you wanted to make this type of historical biblical argument, those are some things you could sprinkle in along with the philosophical conceptions that like Mike is pointing out. Is like, well, if God wants everybody to come to him, like why is death arbitrary, like kind of cut off time period? And so
yeah, and I think the main point is going back to soul building. Again, a lot of people that argue from the problem of evil and suffering presuppose or just assume a utilitarian outlook. It's God's duty to maximize pleasure and decrease suffering. This is something the philosopher Justin Mooney has pointed out. That's just a whole assumption that has just not been justified in the argument from suffering. If God is working from a virtue ethical standpoint, God's duty is to increase virtue and decrease vice, and suffering is a tool that will be used for that. Evil is a tool that will be used against evil's own will for that. So thank you for the super chat. What advice would you guys give for wanting to get into apologetics? Love you both. So I would say the best way to start right now is to start doing shorts. Do like 1 minute, 2 minute, upload them to a TikTok, Instagram, YouTube Shorts, Twitter. Start building an audience slowly like that. It'll be slow. It'll take a while. When you sort of build up an audience from there, maybe start doing some live streams. You'll get like 2 people watching. That's okay. Start doing that. YouTube's pushing live streams now. I'm trying to do 1 a week. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Then you can start doing long form content. I mean, I start with shorts, try some streams, then try some regular videos, and quality over quantity. Put quality work out there. Don't just, when you're doing a short, it's very good to have cuts because the cut is like a jump cut. It actually makes the viewer psychologically like kind of like think, oh, there was a cut, let me pay more attention. So the more cuts you have, the better. And when you do a cut, like you can change the zoom in and out. So quality over quantity is what I'd say. What are your thoughts, James?
Yeah, I don't know if the asker was asking about how to do apologetics, like assuming they have the knowledge and they're like, hey, I want to do like the type of stuff you guys do. If that's what they're asking, I can't give any better advice than Mike. Mike is Mike. Like, look at the channel he's built. Look at what he's doing. I'm not gonna.
Thank you.
I'm not gonna try to like up that. If they're talking about how to like, how do you get this knowledge? Because I have people who DM me or they post things on my comments about like, what book should I read, or what how do I get to know these things? And my like, I don't mean it to be flippant, but like my just only response I can give is like, you just need to start reading a lot, or like you need to start reading a lot of books or papers, or like bare minimum start listening to like live streams or like scholars or experts are interviewed on things. I think that, so it depends on the type of apologetics that you're engaging in. Here's what I've experienced is a lot of people, when they're doing stuff related to biblical studies or theology, a lot of time, even on the academic side of things, they're like, a lot of times they suffer when it comes to the philosophical aspects. And so you need a really good philosophical like framework. One of my go-to recommendations for people who are like, I don't know anything about philosophy, is Philosophical Foundations for a Christian Worldview by William Lane Craig and
Yeah, it's
J.P.
a good place
Maud.
to start. Yeah.
And I don't agree with everything they say in there. I cite it in my dissertation to argue against them on some points, but it's still just such a great work. I can't like recommend any, like that's like one of my go-to things.
No,
But here's the
the
thing.
section on epistemology is really good. Just a good explanation of different epistemic views on different things. Like it's just good
like
foundation.
it's very thorough. But then so like on one side you have people who are doing like biblical studies and those type of arguments, and like if you don't have a good philosophical background, you're gonna like I think you're not gonna do great at that. But it goes the other way because I see people who they're doing like philosophical theology or analytic theology, and I'm like, y'all's biblical like your biblical studies background or your way you handle the text is like really bad. And so I think, at least for me, I would say you need to balance like studying philosophy, like analytic philosophy, like philosophical theology, stuff like that, and doing that and taking that seriously. And you need to balance that with reading biblical studies, like reading people who are specialists in those field, because I think when it comes to apologetics, you have to be able to combine both of those things.
Yeah. Here's what I say to people. Okay, read 10 pages a day. I do 30 a day. If you read 10 pages a day in 1 year, that's 3,650 pages. Okay, how many books do you think that could be? So just do 10 pages a day, read with a highlighter, and you'll read like at least a dozen books in a year.
That's one Craig Keener commentary. Okay, that's
yeah. Fair enough. Yo, IP, your divine hiddenness ID helped me out a lot. Much love and prayers. So I appreciate that. I do want to update that video because there's more stuff I do want to put in there. So I might do that eventually. If you watch my debate on the Gospel Truth channel with Tyler Vella, I debated divine hiddenness. I was really happy with how that debate came out. Check out some of that as well. So I'd highly recommend that. All right. So what do you got coming up on your channel, James? Anything new? Or are you still just working on your dissertation?
I don't know what in the world's coming out on my channel next. So like I've been in a somewhat of a I've put up stuff like somewhat recently. I have a bunch of stuff going on in my personal life right now, like a bunch of stuff that's gonna happen in the next like month. On top of like my school stuff. So
oh my God, you're pregnant.
Yeah. No. Yeah, that would be really ironic because in the earlier in this video, I said I'd be a horrible dad. So it'd be really ironic if that's what would be the thing. No, like we're selling our house, we're moving, we're doing stuff like that. I am trying to finish up my last, hopefully my last semester of school and getting the dissertation stuff. So I've just been really distracted. And I also have other projects that I'm working on that I'm trying to put in writing and not necessarily on like YouTube. And so, I will probably end up at some point being like, yeah, I should go make another video, because every time I say I'm going to stop making videos, I always end up going back and doing more. But as of right now, I don't have any plans because I have so much going on.
Yeah, I'll be back on my channel Friday. We're going to be probably reviewing Rings of Power because everyone knows I love Tolkien's philosophy and they're going to butcher it. So I'll have a friend on. We're going to cover that. And then after that, next week, I have a video coming out titled Luke, an Eyewitness Account. We'll go over all the evidence that Luke actually authored Luke. And then in October, I'll do one on John. Real quick, this comment keeps coming up in the chat. For the love of God. Hey, IP, who made the Moabite stone? And why didn't you mention in your video on 2 Kings chapter 3? Because I was doing commentary on 2 Kings chapter 3. The original script actually had a reference to that. And I was like, this is just making it too long. It's not really relevant to just doing commentary on that chapter, which is what the goal of that video was. And so I was internal. It was an internal commentary of the chapter itself. It was not doing external evidence. So I'd use that instead. But that's the reason. So, all right. I think we got one more super chat. Are you excited about the War of Rohirrim? No, I am not. I saw the preview. I am not. It just looks like another butchering of Tolkien's lore, his philosophy. It's just.
What about Hunt?
Get it.
What about Hunt for Gollum? Do you have any hope for that?
I've given up on Hollywood at this point. They did the 3 movies. And then The Hobbit was crap. And then Rings of Power was even worse. And now these other movies, I just don't trust. They don't like when they were filming the Return of the King, they originally had it. They filmed this all. Frodo throws the ring into the mountain. Sauron personifies, takes a form, and he fights Aragorn. And they cut that out because they realized it was so incompatible with what Tolkien would have wanted. And it would have bastardized his philosophy, because the point of Tolkien's world is no heroes. The only hero is God himself. Like that's a major theme in there. And just they don't, the people doing the modern Tolkien stuff, the modern Tolkien stuff, they don't get that. And they keep bastardizing what he's trying to do.
They're just like, I love money.
Here's the thing. They have the Game of Thrones virus. Okay. They keep constantly, well, Game of Thrones came out, so we want to do Game of Thrones spinoffs, and they're just importing Game of Thrones themes and Game of Thrones philosophy, so Martin's philosophy, into Tolkien's world. Don't do that. Just let Tolkien be Tolkien. They can't do that. Like, let Martin be Martin, let Tolkien be Tolkien. They have different philosophies. Let them tell their different things. They want to keep, but they have this mind virus of Martin's philosophy. They think that's how you do fantasy now. And that's not. Tolkien has a very specific way of doing things they just do not understand. See my video, The Philosophy of Tolkien. It's one of my more popular videos on my channel, and I just go through and I explain why he does say things the way he does. Like, why does he have Gollum steal the ring from Frodo at the end and then just slip off and fall off to the side? That's not just bad writing. There's a specific reason he's doing that. So, correct translation of 1 Timothy 2:12. I think you have a whole video on this responding to Mike Winger, right?
Oh, wait, yeah, I do. Yeah. I have a like 2-hour, I think it's 2-hour long video on my channel where I just address Mike Winger's video. I don't know where you stand on egalitarian and complementarian stuff.
I think I hate the category. I reject the categories. I think there's aspects of both in scripture.
I know also that you tend to keep your like denominational standing secret, and that's not a question that, like, if you answered that question on a live stream, it would let people know, because that would potentially give too much information away. Anyways, I have a video where it's like 2 hours. I engage with Mike Winger, and I cite a decent amount of scholarship in there, and it's on my video. It's if you go to my channel and you type in Mike Winger, you should find it, I think.
Yeah. And I always say, I think the way it should be translated is Paul is saying, I do not permit a woman to teach she is the author of man. Like, he's addressing this weird cult in Ephesus that taught that women created men, kind of thing. And so I have a video on this. I mentioned a little bit about that in a short video I did a while back, where some crazy woman was trying to say that the Jesus fish, the ichthyes, is really just a stolen pagan fertility symbol. And I sort of talked about that. I need to do a bigger time. I know. I just haven't had it time.
Yeah, and if somebody does want to, if somebody wants to hear an egalitarian case that's not just me talking, because who wants to keep hearing me talk? There's a website. It's like TyrionWilliams.com, and I think, if I remember correctly, they have been doing responses to Mike Winger, and I think they have egalitarian scholars work with them on this. Like, I did a little bit of back and forth email with them when they saw my Mike Winger video, and I think, if I remember correctly, they have some scholars they work with, but they have some like long, detailed blog post on some of that stuff from an egalitarian perspective, if that's the type of thing you're into and you want to do your arguments about that.
Yeah. I'm definitely more egalitarian, but I have kind of a nuanced view. I need to eventually put it in a video. If Jesus commanded his disciples to baptize in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, how come in Acts they only baptize in the name of Jesus? Because it's basically the same thing in their view. I mean, Jesus is fully God. So it wasn't an issue for them. They saw Jesus as God. He represents the whole triune God himself. So not a big deal. I never really saw that as an issue ever. I mean, like,
well, one is clearly just a later development of, the Christologies of the early church.
Yeah.
Tongue in cheek, I'm saying that.
Thoughts on David Litt was redating the Gospels? I completely disagree. I have a video called Early Dating of the Gospels. It came out in March. And I don't respond to him, but I do respond to some people late dating like Acts and Luke to like the 2nd century and show that's just utter nonsense. And so there's a lot more evidence for early dating of the Gospels, at least to the 60s, is what I would say. Martin's philosophy is incest. Game of Thrones and Elden Ring. Yeah, it's weird he's got to put that much in. But no, his philosophy is antithetical to Tolkien. It's like turning Tolkien on its head. He sort of so Tolkien is really against Nietzschean philosophy, the Übermensch, and Tolkien takes the Übermensch concept and makes it a good thing. So again, I talk about this in my video, The Philosophy of Tolkien. I actually compare him to Martin at times. So Martin takes the Übermensch mentality and he makes it a good thing. The Übermensch is who saves Westeros from the invaders. Whereas in Tolkien, Übermensch are the villains. Anyone who becomes an Übermensch becomes a problem, like Boromir, for example. So check that out if you're interested. But yeah, there's a lot of really deep, rich thoughts they're both trying to give in their stories. And it's just missed often in these kinds of things. And this is what Hollywood is doing. They're rebooting all these Tolkien things and not doing what I think Tolkien wanted to do. And I think they'll eventually do this with Martin as well. Although House of Dragon is pretty good. I think House of Dragon is really getting Martin's philosophy dead on, in my view. Opinions on the Buddhist miracles rainbow body. I have no idea. I'd have to look into that. Sorry, I have no knowledge of that.
That's like this type of thing that Dale Allison talks, if I remember correctly, Dale Allison talks about, and like.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Yeah, I do slightly remember that, but I'd have to look it up to remind myself.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, don't have it on the top of my head.
I don't have that on top of my head either. I know what they're referring to, but I don't have that on top of my head. That's
all right. So
it's a fan question, I think.
Final thoughts on Mindshift's video.
It was not good. I'm trying to be more ironic lately in how I deal with people online. I'm trying to be kinder. So I will say I do not think it was good.
Again, I have a mentality. You're nice to me, I'm nice to you. And Mindshift has been nothing but nice to me. I think he's a really good guy. I just think a lot of his concepts are just... I think he needs to get a worldview and stick with it. It seems like he's sort of just throwing whatever he can against the wall and hoping it sticks. Like Stan and I responded to a video a few months ago where he said God's evil. And then in this video, he's like, why isn't God actually causing the suffering if it's really that good? It's like, well, pick a narrative, dude. It's I almost said welcome to Dawa for some reason, but we're not responding to Muslims. So
welcome to that. It's okay. That. It's like it's the same idea. We're just gonna throw stuff at the wall and see what sticks. Yeah.
So is Satan an angel according to scripture? I would say he's a rebellious seraph specifically.
Yeah, that's close enough.
Yeah,
like when people ask me, like I'll be talking about like divine council stuff and Elohim and like sons of God, and they're like, so they're angels? I'm like, not technically, but I know what you're thinking about. So like, why not? Like close enough. Like I'm not gonna mishmash words here. Like whatever you're thinking about when you think about angel, it's something in that ballpark. Yeah.
You see my video Genesis 3:8, the serpent. I explain why I think the serpent is actually a rebellious seraph in that chapter, and I use a lot of Heiser's work on that. So, all right. So real quick, let me just put your book back up here for anyone interested in your views of atonement and how you're wrestling with these issues. I have it linked below for anyone interested. Anything else you want to say before we close this out?
Thanks for having me on. I enjoyed it, and yeah, that's about it. That's all I got. I'm so excited to hear that Mike is as willing to go to the throwdown on defending Tolkien as I was, because I was prepping my remarks for this, and I was like, I just don't know if Mike's gonna be down with me talking about Tolkien for 15 minutes. And then Mike was like, well, then another thing. Like, so I was like, okay, cool.
You know nothing of me, sir. If you
I don't.
Again, I have read Lord of the Rings, all 3 books out loud twice to my daughter at this point. I have probably read The Hobbit out loud at least 7 times to her because she enjoyed that more. Because, it's more of a kid's book anyway. But so I've read Tolkien's work. I should probably read the Silmarillion out loud at this point. I mean, I might as well throw it in there.
No, that's all I got to say. Thanks for having me on. I had fun. Appreciate it.
All right. I'll be back again. I think Friday we're going to review Rings of Power when it comes out. And I hope it's good, but it probably won't be if it's given what we've already seen so far. So
predictive prophecy. Sorry. I'm sorry. I just can't. Goodbye, everybody.
Yeah. I'll see you guys Friday back on my channel.